Hello. I would request everyone to be seated. We'll start the session. Good morning, everyone. After the interactive sessions yesterday, I welcome you all to the second day of the third Strategic and Security Dialogue. We begin with session 3 this morning, which will focus on regional hotspots. The chairperson is Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, former ambassador to China, Bhutan, and Pakistan. The speakers for this session are Ms. Namrata Hasija, Colonel M.B.B. Nalin Herat, and Dr. Alvite Ningthaujam. I would request Ambassador Gautam Bambale, former ambassador to China, Bhutan, and Pakistan, to chair this session. I hope all of you are on the dais, the dignitaries for this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. Just to keep in mind and remind all of you, but I know all of you know this, let's keep in focus that the topic of our conference, of our seminar, of our 2-day symposium is the rise of China and its implications for the world. And this particular session this morning from 10:30 to 12 is on regional hotspots. So we are going to be talking about India's neighborhood and the Chinese influence in the neighborhood. Now, I'll just make one point at the start, which is that very often, we find analysts and researchers in India who analyze this particular subject by saying that, oh, the Chinese are doing A, B, C, and D in country X, Y, or Z, or in the Indian Ocean, or something of that sort. Now, to me, this is not a very satisfactory approach, for the simple reason that if you're drawing up a balance sheet, you have to put in and you have to enter not only what is on the debit side, you have to also enter what's on the credit side. Only then you have a full balance sheet. So this approach, which then leads to a lot of hand-wringing, to me at least seems to be and appears to be not a very practical approach. If, for example, you're looking at what the Americans are doing vis-a-vis the Chinese, then you have to put in, in the balance sheet what the Americans are doing. Or if you're doing an India-China comparison, then apart from saying that the Chinese are doing A, B, C, D, E, F, you should also put in what India is doing, X, Y, Z, and so on. And only then you arrive at a proper balance sheet and you're able to arrive at certain conclusions. So I have this great problem with Indian analysts, etc., who only do this and then leads to a lot of hand-wringing, which doesn't really matter and which doesn't lead to results. So what we are going to do is I'm going to allow each of the speakers to speak for about 15 minutes. I hope that's okay with all of you. And that leaves us enough time to make this an interactive session also. I'd like to take any amount of questions from the floor. Apart from questions, you're free to give your own judgments, etc. My only request to you will be to be brief and to the point and not deliver another lecture. So let's proceed as per the schedule of the program. And the first speaker is, of course, Ms. Namrata Hasija, Research Fellow at the CCAS. And she's going to talk about Chinese footprints in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Maldives. Namrata, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me begin by thanking my organization, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, Pune University, and CAS for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I don't have a lot of slides, but I'll just run through initially, just start by saying that I'm talking about, Chinese footprints in Nepal, Maldives, and Bangladesh. Let me begin by saying that we at the center, we are also following very closely at the Chinese activities in India. We, of course, bring out a report every month. So if any of you are interested, you can get in touch with us. So in India, like what we have seen, at least in the last 1 year, though the embassy, at New Delhi is, kind of a little less active. The consulates in Mumbai and Calcutta have picked up from there. They have been getting in touch with, of course, in Maharashtra, especially the Mumbai consulate. The pattern that we are seeing is that, of course, they are wooing the business community also, but they are also getting in touch with few minority communities. They are going, visiting their temples. They are also getting in touch with the farmers, like, the consulate general of Mumbai. He also had kind of lunch with all the farmers in the fields and everything. So they are reaching out to the specific, sectors, which to me is, the long probably game that the Chinese are, playing here. And in Calcutta also, they are reaching to specific schools, specific, communities in, Calcutta and in Bengal, and they are very active in, in these activities. So let me now begin by talking about what they're doing in Nepal. And, okay. Is it not working? Okay. Okay, so let me just begin by, something a little provocative. Now, this is one of the posters that, one of the travel agencies that is sponsored by, the Chinese government, they had on display here. Welcome to Nepal, gateway to China. So, just to begin with, I'm starting with this. And, we talk about a lot that the Chinese are, of course, close the communist parties in Nepal and how they have, been playing this role of getting them together. The recent, pact between Prachanda and Oli is also like, because they want to unite the communists, they want them to stay together. But what is of interest to us is that they're actually penetrating not only to the main political parties, but what they are doing is that they have started influencing the local elections, the municipal elections, and also the village elections. Now, this is one candidate. He is the mayor of Kathmandu. Now, he, when he was campaigning, he was always accompanied by Chinese officials, working in the embassy in Nepal. And there were reports that, because he's an independent candidate, and he got a lot of funding from the Chinese embassy. And so now he's the mayor of Kathmandu. And also he, he did a lot of campaigns. He's been very vocal about, a lot of issues. Though he had a little tiff with the Chinese embassy after they published the maps, and there were a lot of reports that were published in the Nepalese media that he has cancelled his trip to China. That is, of course, to woo the local, voters also. But there have been so many reports of his meeting with the Chinese ambassador in Nepal and trying to, get funds to develop Kathmandu. And there have been a series of meetings. Right after he won the elections, he also met the Chinese ambassador. And he said he's going to do a project where he's going to highlight the similarities between Nepal and China in culture, in food, and other things. And he's going to portray that to the, people and kind of, ask them to, get along with China. Now, this thing is also very, very worrying, what the Chinese are doing in the Nepalese villages. So now the Nepalese village, the panchayats are very strong, when it comes to their influence. Now they have been running a propaganda there, which is called one village, one person. So what the Chinese are doing is that, they are propagating that from every village there should be only one candidate. So, the democratic elections where there'll be many candidates, they are trying to kind of, persuade this propaganda that is going on is that from every village there'll be only one person. So basically, either their person or person that they support or the whole village supports, and there'll be no elections. So this is something that is worrying, and now it's been going on for a couple of years. So this is something that, we should, kind of look forward to. Now there have been a lot of factories that are, run by the Chinese nationals. Most of it is run by the Chinese nationals, which are at either Indo-Nepal border or the border between China and Nepal. Now these factories are, if I can say, innocent factories, because most of them have, producing meat, cigarettes, or other manufacturing units, factories. But what these factories are actually doing, because they are being run by the Chinese nationals, now these are the factories that are actually pumping in money into the local elections. So the money that, these factories that are run by the Chinese nationals, they are pumping money not only into the local elections, but also the influence operations that China is doing. And so this is also another development that is taking place in Nepal. Now, then we all are aware of the China Study Centers. There are more than maybe 30 officially registered China Study Centers, but the number is of course more. And many of them are also at the India-Nepal border. And some of them, the reports are especially, there'll be a map that I'll show you later, so we'll know, I'll tell you the districts or the areas where few of these centers are. So there have been reports that many of them are equipped with surveillance and military communication equipment. And many of the staff of these China study centers have been writing articles, anti-India. So, they're kind of driving that narrative. And most of the writers are very, very young. So these are young scholars who are studying in these centers that, are doing. Now, I think just this last week, there was an approval of the Nepal-China Friendship Park. Now, this is, I wanted to show the location. It's not, okay. Now, this is the location of that park, Jhapa district. So that actually overlooks the Siliguri corridor or the Chicken Neck corridor. So the location is very strategic, I would say. And to me, when it comes to the Chinese, I think it's a long game. It's not just an innocent China-Nepal friendship park that they are having, especially in these regions. Now, you also see the other regions that, are on this map that I have just shown. Now, these are also regions where the China study centers that I was talking about are there. Especially if you look at Bhiratnagar and all these places, they have these China study centers that, in fact, many of our Indian forces that were at the border also reported that they have that, the military equipment and surveillance equipment in these centers. So this is something that, these were some things that I wanted to highlight. Now, as Ambassador Gautam said that, we tend to just highlight what the Chinese are doing, but I wanted to bring these to all of you that these are the activities that we should, probably understand how the Chinese are doing it and how far they have penetrated. Now, every week, and this is, through our reports that we are getting from, the Chinese language websites, every week there is a delegation to Nepal from Chinese, and they're keeping a very close tab on, the political parties and all the political developments, and they're meeting the leaders, like I said, almost every week, and they're trying to keep the communist parties united. Now, even though, of course, the Nepalese public is not that happy with the communists, but, the Chinese are keeping the parties together. Other than these, the Chinese are coming in big way in Nepal, be it the media houses, newspapers. They've also started, in fact, they've increased the pensions along these border areas. They're giving pensions to people living in the border areas. So I think these are the things that India must take note of. And I'm not saying that India is not doing anything. Of course, we're also reaching out to all the political parties. We're also doing our bit, what we can. But these are some things that we should keep in mind, what the Chinese are doing. And I think Nepal especially would be, a place of a cockpit of contentions between India, China, and the US initially. So these are the things that, at least in Nepal, we should take note of. And second, which we've been talking about in India recently, is the Maldives thing. Now, if you Maldives is also a democracy, and we have to understand that if today there's a government that supports China, it will, things can also change. It happened last time when the Chinese actually said that they're going to bring a government that will be more, pro-China this time. And if you read President Muizu's, the language that he's using when he's, issuing some directions, they are very similar to, the way Chinese write their directions. In 2020, actually, when I attended the Raisina dialogue also, when the Russian foreign minister was speaking about Indo-Pacific, it felt that it's not, actually, it's like the Chinese foreign minister speaking. So even Muizu's directions, if you read, they're very, the language is the way Chinese write, but of course, India is doing its bit in Mauritius. We are also, doing our bit when it comes to these places. And I think in Maldives right now, the situation is not very favorable to India, but India is of course reaching out, and India is also doing its bit in the Indian Ocean that we can, do. And then let me talk about Bangladesh. I don't want to talk a lot about Bangladesh because I think as long as Sheikh Hasina is there, she understands, where what lies for Bangladesh and what is there for Bangladesh. But little things worry me, especially when in the sense we have to take into account now this is the state-run Bangladesh television, and the Chinese actually gave in a huge money, and this is like a 2015 project which they sanctioned, which they were supposed to finish by 2022. Huge sum of money to establish 7 state-run Bangladesh television stations in Bangladesh. So, and of course, Sheikh Hasina also to keep her army happy, she's buying that arms and armaments. But, the relationship, especially of the young officials in Bangladesh, they are very, they go at least 200 to 300 every year are going to China for their training and some coursework and also learning Mandarin. And they are, very close to, if I may say, of course, to the Chinese armed officials. So these are the things that we must notice. And of course, there's a strong Islamic movement that's coming in Bangladesh. And this is where actually India and Bangladesh interest align, because that would be something that, both would not want. And Bangladesh, that's why at least now is less of a worry for India, because here our strategic alliances are there with, Sheikh Hasina. So this is, overall what the Chinese are doing. But also for me, I think, like I said, Nepal is a place of contention, because recently in March there was also a delegation, a 6-member PLA delegation led by PLA Major General Chang Pauchun. He's the Deputy Director of PLA Office of International Military Cooperation. He called on the Nepal Army Chief Prabhu Ram Sharma at Nepal Army Headquarters on March 10th. And this is the same delegation that was visiting Nepal. They also visited Sri Lanka, and they also visited Maldives, and they reached a new security agreement with Maldives. So, when we look at the Chinese footprints in this region, and especially when we look at what they're doing in Nepal, what they're doing in Maldives and Bangladesh, like, all I'm saying is that India should follow. India should understand the Chinese interest and what the Chinese are doing here, because especially in Nepal, and I was discussing with one of my friends that the way they bully Nepal, it's kind of, you don't see that in, at least that kind of bullying in other, regions. So just wanted to bring out, that these are the Chinese footprints, and these are the things that are happening in Nepal especially, and Maldives and Bangladesh, that India should, take note of. And we are, of course, doing our bit, and I won't take much of the time so that we have more for the Q&A round, and I'll just end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata. And let's move to our next speaker, Colonel Nalin Herath, who's here from Sri Lanka. He's the Director General and Acting Director of the Institute of National Security Studies in Colombo. And he's going to be talking about Chinese footprints in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Colonel Herath.
Chair and panel members, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And first of all, let me thank you, Sir Ranade sir, for inviting me for you and your wonderful organization. And thank you very much for your wonderful hospitality also. So within these 15 minutes, I will talk about Chinese footprints in Sri Lanka. And you know that everyone is cautious about Sri Lanka-Chinese relations. And if we talk about Sri Lanka-Chinese relations, I'm not going to elaborate about the history about Sri Lankan-Chinese relations, but Sri Lanka recognized diplomatically China in 1950. And after that, Sri Lanka and China engaged with an agreement that is, we call it Rubber Rice Pact in 1952. So in that pact, according to that pact, Sri Lanka provided rubber to China, and in turn, China provided rice. So that's how the diplomatic relations started in the modern history. And even if we take India also, we have India and Sri Lanka, both the countries have a very kind of legacy relationship. It's over 2,500 years. I would say that it's a kind of a special relationship in terms of religion, culture, whatever, and social, economically, even defense ties. So with that, I will talk about China's footprint in Sri Lanka and South Asian security. And at the moment, China is, I know that everyone knows that China is concerned about Sri Lanka, and everybody talks about Sri Lanka is a kind of geopolitical turmoil. But let me clarify one thing. So, of course, at the outset, you may see that Sri Lanka is in a kind of geopolitical turmoil, but the President very clearly said that Sri Lanka is not going to be a part of any of the superpowers, but Sri Lanka is still following the principles of non-aligned. And we know that Sri Lanka's location, it's a kind of special geographical location. We know that during the Second World War also, British Empire, they had a lot of interest, and they harbored 7th Fleet in Trincomalee. And because of this geographical location, Sri Lanka has a lot of attention from all the countries. So this is one of the key point when it comes to Sri Lankan location. And we know that China started investing in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka also became a part of BRI. So as per that plan, Sri Lanka also was granted certain financial grants and as loans. And we established certain projects, like if I name main projects, that is Hambantota Harbour and Mattala Airport and Port City. So these are the three main projects China really invested in Sri Lanka. And other one is, when it comes to China-Sri Lanka relations, we have diplomatic relations also. And during the 30 years of war, most of the time China came as a kind of savior of Sri Lanka during the Security Council resolution. So there are a number of resolutions passed against Sri Lanka, and there is a claim that Sri Lankan troops committed war crimes. But it's very clearly proved that it's open, and we never say that, okay, we are 100% clearly conducted, so none of the conflicts cannot be conducted in 100% in a very 100% proper way. But Sri Lankan troops wanted to do that conflict with a humanitarian angle. That's how Sri Lankan troops conducted this humanitarian operation for 3.5 years, and after 3.5 years, we finished the war. But there were a number of resolutions, so during these resolutions at the Security Council, China especially came as a savior. And other one is China and Sri Lankan military ties. And China, during the 30 years of war, especially China provided a lot of military hardware, especially from Norinco, and especially when it comes in terms of armored personnel carriers and some other weapons. So during the 30 years of war, Sri Lanka was granted and China provided some military assistance as India did. And if I talk about these three projects, that is Hambantota actually, it's a dug-in harbor. We had to duck because we had to duck certain land areas also. And initially, Sri Lanka asked India to take the project, but India reluctant to take it. So after that, China came and China took it. And this harbor is, of course, it's a multi-facility harbor. You can, it has the container facilities, it has cooling facilities, storage facilities, and everything. So it's a multi-facility harbor. And but only thing is the security is handled by Sri Lanka Navy, and in the meantime, so any ship they can do the port calling irrespective of the flags. There is no any other restrictions. And actually, the Mattala airport also constructed to support each other. So Mattala and Hambantota, it's very close by. So initially, it was assumed that, okay, these two must support each other. So Hambantota port and Mattala airport. And political parties may see this Mattala airport in a different way. But actually the main idea, the whole idea was to support each other, port and airport. And we have that Colombo port city, that is a 1.4 billion investment project. So at the moment, the second phase is going to be started. The land extends around 269 hectares. So the second phase is going to be commenced in June 2024, within this year. And at the moment, government is doing a lot of all the preliminary work in order to go ahead with the second phase. And once this port city is completed, it's going to be a kind of financial hub in South Asia. So that is the vision of the government. And once the entire project is completed, this project has the potential to inject 13 billion US dollars for the national GDP. So that kind of potential it has. And other one is the Sri Lanka, some analysts, some critics say that Sri Lanka is in a debt trap. Yes, of course, I am not going to say that Sri Lanka is in a debt trap, but China invested heavily, so more than 4 billion US dollars. And you know that everyone knows that Sri Lanka had to undergo economic crisis 2 years back. So that time everyone thought that, okay, China would be a very true friend, but that time India came and offered 3.8 billion. So India came as a savior. So 1 year it was kind of very unstable situation we had to undergo. Even Sri Lankan, some citizens, they struggle to get their basic needs, even like gas, fuel. So with the Indian credit line of 3.8 billion. So Sri Lankans actually, we can say that it was highly benefited. So that was the real story. And you know that there was a people's uprising in Colombo especially. There was a people uprising, and legally elected president, he was asked to go. Actually, he had to leave the power and he had to go after 2.5 years. So there was a period of 72 hours period. It's kind of, there was no legal government, there was no legal president, and the country was unofficially, country was controlled by Secretary Defense and you can say CDS. So that's how the story went through. And at the moment, then what happened now after that, Sri Lanka had to seek for IMF assistance. So in the IMF assistance, IMF agreed to grant 2.8 billion, and one of the condition was we had to restructure our whatever the debts. So India agreed, India heavily supported, Japan heavily supported, and at the initial phase, China bit reluctant to come up with the negotiation of debt restructuring process, but last moment they also agreed. Now China also in an agreement with the Sri Lanka debt restructuring process. So this is the Hambantota port, and as I said, it's a dug-in harbor. It has a very good potential to be one of the leading harbor in Sri Lanka and basically South Asian region. And this is port city. As I said, it has a big potential, huge potential to be one of the main contributor for the Sri Lankan GDP. So as I said, the second phase is going to be commenced within this year. So there are a lot of projects are going on. So it's going to be considered as a financial hub in South Asia. So at the moment, President has appointed separate committee, and they are really working on and working hard in order to start the second phase and go ahead with the project. So if I elaborate something about China's military cooperation with Sri Lanka, so we conduct joint military exercises, that is enhanced military training and coordination. And there were certain incidents, there were a couple of Chinese research vessels came to Colombo. And after that, India said that India is concerning about India's security, especially about research vessels. So after that, Sri Lankan government had to take a decision. No any research vessels would be allowed in future. So now, no any research vessels would be allowed in Sri Lanka. But other ships they can do the port calling. There is no any restriction. And arms sales, supply of military equipment and technology. So especially during the wartime, and very recently also, a couple of weeks ago, they donated some unexploded explosive detection devices to Ministry of Defense. Then defense collaboration, strategic defense partnerships at the moment. So this is how the military cooperation is going on. And we sent a couple of officers to China also for their further training. So China's growing economic power, we know that. So China is having 17 trillion of GDP. And China is, when it comes to this region, China is having a lot of interest. And China is trying to dominate at the certain areas, especially maritime security. When it comes to maritime security, President very specifically emphasized the freedom of navigation has to be respected. So no country cannot, no country can restrict freedom of navigation. So he very strictly emphasized during a number of conferences. He emphasized freedom of navigation, and he emphasized that Sri Lanka would not be a kind of, we are not going to go between geopolitical competition. So Sri Lanka will act as a neutral, not neutral, Sri Lanka still will follow non-aligned principles. So it's a kind of, when it comes to China's influence in Sri Lanka, so if we talk about geopolitical dynamics, so Sri Lanka's balancing act is very important. So it's a kind of tightrope. So that's why President is he's trying to take some kind of decisions, especially when it comes to the foreign ministry. And very recently that MOU and the document released by foreign ministry about these research vessels, and China again requested, but foreign ministry said no, we can't grant the permission. And what I want to say is it's a kind of very difficult period for Sri Lanka, as Sri Lanka is gradually recovering from the economic crisis. And now Sri Lanka is seeking for the second installment of IMF loan. So now the negotiations are going on. And it's a kind of that we know that when it comes to Sri Lanka, even US, Japan, even India, China, all are interested. And still we follow the non-aligned principles. As per the non-aligned principle, Sri Lanka has to go kind of tightrope work, but President is very specified, clear, and he still wants to remain with the non-aligned principle. And somebody asked, during one of these kind of sessions, somebody asked, when you are in an economic crisis, how can Sri Lanka still be a non-aligned country? This is another question. So that question I leave to audience. So with the conclusion, so Sri Lanka finds itself in a very complex situation. So open communication, transparency in our dealings with all parties, and a commitment to regional stability are absolutely critical for Sri Lanka. And country believe that by fostering trust and cooperation, Sri Lanka can ensure a peaceful and prosperous future for ourselves and all of South Asia. And navigating a delicate balancing act between a rising China and our long-standing partner, India. So I can remember last Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Honorable Bagle, he said, if Sri Lanka is secured, India is secured. So that's what he said during his last comments before his departure from Sri Lanka. So this point has been taken heavily and very seriously by Sri Lanka. So whatever the matter concerning to Indian security or Indian security posture, so Sri Lanka is very concerned about that. So Sri Lanka will not do any kind of act or anything, whatever it's going to have some kind of effects for Indian security. So that is guaranteed by our President itself. So thank you very much for your patience, and during your question and answer session, I can clarify some doubts.
Thank you very much, Colonel Nalin Herath. That was an excellent presentation, like Namrata's before him. Let's move to our final speaker and then have a lot of time for Q&A interaction between the floor and the speakers here. The final speaker is my colleague and friend, Dr. Alvait Ningthojam. We both are part of the Symbiosis International University. I have great respect for his knowledge of international studies, but particularly the region in which he specializes, which is the Middle East. And he's going to be talking about the Israel-Hamas war and the footprints of China in that part of the world. Over to you, Alvait.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this warm introduction. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Pune University for giving me this opportunity to speak at this very prestigious institution for the first time, and also to my friend Namrata and Rana Desa for having me on board to speak on a subject which I look from some close proximity for the last few years. But this is not to claim that I'm an expert on China's foreign policy or security policy. I mostly looked at from the prism of what they are doing in the Middle East being my core area of research. And at the same time, it's also a challenging task to add another topic to this presentation on Israel-Hamas that has come from the organizer, to add a few words about what's going on in the region, and then I'll go to the main component of my presentation. I don't have a PPT, but I'll be giving an extemporary on this subject. Just a little bit of what is happening right now in this part of the world, or particularly in the Middle East. The conflict, I don't have to go to the history of the Israel-Hamas conflict, or going all the way back to 1948 when the state was formed. To me, this conflict that had begun on 3rd of October, of course, was a very surprising element. But at the same time, this was in the making. This was in the making for quite some time. There has been a long-standing hatred between the two sides, the Israelis and the Hamas, which they are, of course, the Israeli government has seen as a terror organization ever since they have been designated by the US government and the other governments from different parts of the world, particularly in Europe. The October attack came exactly 50 years after the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and that was also discussed as another surprise attack. It raised lots of questions in the minds of many analysts, why Israelis were not able to detect this sort of planning of this scale, and despite having some of the world's finest intelligence or any kind of resources, and in terms of the gathering of the information about what's being planned in and around the region. But there are few things which have been going on in the region, particularly you can discuss that from the prism of what's happening inside Israel in the last 1.5 months or 1.5 years or 2 years time, or what's happening in the region sometime from 2016-17 onwards. This conflict that has seen no end, there's no end in sight to this conflict at the moment right now. All the attempts being made with regard to ceasefire remains futile. There are, of course, just yesterday also there were updates about the Israeli government showing some willingness to take a delegation to Qatar and find out another ways and means to come to a ceasefire. But for the longest time, we have seen, particularly say in the last 9 to 10 years, there has been some sort of an impression that the Middle East is undergoing some change in terms of geopolitical realignments between the Israelis and the Sunni country, or the moderate countries, particularly the Gulf countries. And that was taken as a kind of course, that is a very positive development that we have seen in the region, and particularly for a country like Israel that has only been surrounded by the adversaries in the region. One of the objectives, the foreign policy objectives of Israel, is to gain that diplomatic recognition and political acceptance, which they have been able to do since 2020 in the form of the Abrahamic Accord. They were under the impression that if we sign this agreement, there would be long-lasting peace in the region, and the region will be more integrated, and there will be more coordination amongst the countries. But on the other side, they have not, or people have not paid much attention to what could have been, in the minds of the opponents of this sort of a breakthrough that we got to see in the region. And in that, there was one particular topic, that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which had not seen much movements or forward progress in the last many years. So by staging this attack on 7 October last year, Hamas has been able to bring to the fore again, to the table, the topic that has been seen as a kind of a redundant or dormant. But so they have been able to bring back the discussions, and now everyone's discussing about Arab-Israeli or the impending resolutions between the two sides. And that has many other implications, regional implications and international implications. I will not go into the details of the casualties. All of us are reading this news on daily basis. the difficulties. But at the same time, it also puts the region in the spotlight again. Because in the last few years, we have had quite a few important announcements being made with regard to connectivity and corridor projects. And I was a part of the Asia Economic Dialogue, which happened towards the end of last year, and spoke on what IMAC means to India. Are we still, going ahead with the IMAC project? This sort of a projects might take a little bit of a hit, particularly with the involvement of the Israelis. I'm not saying that this is going to be stalled. If you look at the some of the statements coming from the Gulf countries or any other Middle Eastern countries, apart from condemnations, none has spoken about snapping their agreements with regard to I2U2 or IMAC. But at the same time, they will be a little cautious of dealing very openly with a country like Israel at the moment. Because why I'm saying this is the Abraham Accords or the I2U2 or any other big sounding projects, they are mostly being done by the ruling elites, and which kind of has an understanding with the Israeli government or the US or India or any other countries being a part of those projects. But they also have to be mindful of the sentiments of the public. Because they would not want to see another Arab Springs on the streets of UAE or Oman or Bahrain or Qatar, or even if you look at the responses coming from the Middle East right after the attack, you don't see much of the protests on the streets of Saudi Arabia or Oman or UAE. You would see mostly in Turkey, you would see them in Lebanon, Syria or Iraq that still have some major problem with Israel. So that also speaks a lot about the changing dynamics of the geopolitics in the Middle East. And there is also strong convergence of interest between the Arab countries and the Israelis, and that had led to the normalization of the ties, which was unthinkable until recent years. But then, as I said, the nature of the interactions will be a little slowed down for the moment. But other, for instance, like UAE has just mentioned that they are going to, stall the agreements along with BP for a major oil project with UAE day before yesterday, involving an Israeli company. So that could be a little bit of a byproduct of this conflict, because they would not want to come out very openly in dealing with the Israelis for the moment, keeping into considerations what kind of a backlash they could entice from the public. We can have a round of discussions about this, but let me go to the other aspect of my presentation on China's footprints in the Middle East. Most of us sitting in this room looked at the China's footprints, particularly in countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, even Pakistan for that matter. But there is one region where they are making a speedy inroad, and that is the Middle Eastern region. I'm sure some of you, of course, must have been following the kind of changes that we are seeing in the region. And this has come at this juncture when the Indian government is also increasing our footprints in this region massively in almost all the sectors, let alone the traditional oil energy trade, or the amount of remittances that come to our country, or the kind of a workforce we send to the Gulf or any other parts of West Asia. But in the last, say, 8 to 9 years, there has been a massive improvement in terms of our profile in West Asia, and that is very important for us to sustain that sort of equilibrium, I must say. But at the same time, we have seen a very significant presence of the Chinese companies or the governments in this region. And I must tell you that this is not a terrain. This is not a new terrain for the Chinese. They have come dealing with this region, but not as much as they are doing right now. But what has led to more footprints in the region is because of the announcement of the BRI in 2013. They have realized the importance of the strategic locations of the West Asian countries, particularly countries like Iraq, countries like say Israel, even for that matter Lebanon, Syria. Looking at the strategic location, Oman for that matter. If you look at the some of the projects which are being carried out by China in the Middle East, you can see them massively in countries like Oman in terms of special economic zones, port constructions. And if you look at the profile, they are mostly concentrated in few areas. Infrastructural development is one, and in that you have railway lines, road projects, electromagnification of the railway lines, and they are really eyeing the construction of ports in different parts of the region. So in 2016, when Xi Jinping went to 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Egypt, he announced unveiled something called China's Arab Paper Policy, and they have 3 components in that. It's a very lengthy, detailed policy paper, and they have 3 components in that: 1+2+3 cooperation model, talking about a win-win development model for both sides. One being the infrastructure and energy constructions, the second being the trade and investment, and the third being the new technologies that includes the nuclear, space, and now they're adding defense to it, artificial intelligence to it, and many other nanotechnological aspects. So if you look at the investments, or if you look at the presence of the Chinese government, all the activities are particularly along these 3 or 4 areas. First, infrastructure, and then the energy, and then you have the newer technologies, including nuclear, and now they are giving lots of emphasis on the arms trade. I have written a detailed piece for the Diplomat in 2021, mentioning that the Middle East is going to be the next emerging market for the Chinese arms producers. They are already doing that. Of course, it's not as comparable to what the Americans are selling. The bulk of the armaments that are being used by the Middle Eastern countries are all American origin. And at the same time, nowadays, there are many other countries looking into it. Why there is a very great synergy between Middle East and China, and that has got a lot to do with oil. China is the world's largest oil importer, and that Middle East is a very crucial supplier. And also the trade, the component of the trade is very significant. If you look at the figure, the trade between China and GCC alone in 2022 is about 315 billion, while for India it's about 135 or 27 for the year 2022. And then countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Saudi Arabia remains the top destination for some of the energy related corporations with the Chinese government. And at the same time, there are also, this is just an example to give you an example about why there is a speedy improvement in the relationships. Now, in terms of political relationship, they are cultivating a very strong partnerships with Middle Eastern countries. We can see the frequency of the visits of the different leaders, particularly UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar. One area which the Chinese is really increasingly looking forward to penetrate more robustly is the political and diplomatic sector. We have already seen that when they were playing a part in bringing together Iran and Saudi Arabia last year, and the reconciliation deal that was signed on 10 March, also spoke a bit about the gradual political cloud which the Chinese are gaining in the region. But this is not to say that they're a major player. If you look at the history of what's happening in the Middle East, the Americans continue to remain one of the most important political players. And even if you look at the current Hamas-Israel conflict, there are lots of anxieties within the Israelis also that the Chinese are not doing enough to bring together both the sides, or not playing enough political role in this conflict. But the Americans are still, in some way or the other, leaving that door open and being a pioneer in that field. One area I mentioned very briefly is the arms sales. This is a growing trend, and they are looking for co-productions. And one of the reasons why they have been able to get into this sector is because of certain reluctance of the Americans to provide certain types of weapon systems, particularly the armed drones. Regardless of the quality, when you compare with American-made armed drones and the Chinese-made armed drones, countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia are already availing some of these products, particularly the Wing-Lung armed drones. There are reports available online that talks about the supply of this, and they are looking for more co-production, collaborators in the field of defense, and that is one area. pushing for more investments. And at the same time, it's also, we can also see the interests of countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia to come and invest in India. So we should not lose out on those opportunities. And we have seen many of those developments in the last 6 to 7 years. Then we need to be a little more proactive in terms not only dealing with the region bilaterally, and this is something which I have also touched upon when I talk at the Asia Economic Dialogue. We also need to look at the region holistically with GCC, with the Arab League, with the OIC, despite the problems that we have politically. We also need to have certain regional mechanisms to engage with them. That's one difference that we have with the Chinese government. They have China Arab States Forum for Cooperation, which they meet biannually, and then that also gives them a good platform to discuss all kinds of aspects, bilateral problems, at the same time opportunities, prospects, regional problems, opportunities, and prospects. So we need to revive that discussions, the dialogues that we used to have with countries, with organizations like Arab League, and we need to have a lot more engagements with the GCC. To conclude, I would say the Chinese government would continue to increase their footprints in the region. They have some commodities which the Middle Eastern countries really want in terms of renewable energy, because many of these countries in West Asia now are looking towards energy transition. So the Chinese are very, very keen to provide whatever they could to these countries, and that's one of the important markers of the ties right now, the cooperation in the renewable energy sector. And as long as the fossil fuel continues to remain one of the most important mediums for the economic development programs for China, Middle East will continue to remain as their important partners. So the ties, and moreover, the business between the two sides remain a little bit easier because there are involvement of state-owned enterprises from both the sides, be it in China or be it in the Gulf countries. So that makes it a little more easier for them to engage bilaterally. So this is where I'll answer, and we'll take it up in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvait, and I think we have enough time to have a good interaction between the floor and the speakers on the dais. I can see that there are a few hands already up. What I'd request you is, just introduce yourself and be as specific and short as possible. But let me also pull the privilege of being the chair of the session to ask the first question, which is to Colonel Nalin Herath, and this is not so much to do about Chinese footprints in Sri Lanka, but I've always been thinking that you have two deep water ports in close proximity to each other, Colombo and Hambantota. Now, isn't it a challenge to make both of them successful, to make both of them profitable? Particularly because of the fact that that Colombo port is well established, is being expanded. So isn't it a big challenge to make both these deep water ports successful or profitable, say in the next 5-year term or in the next 4 to 5 years?
So you are referring to port city or ports? Port.
The port itself, yeah.
Yes, sir. In fact, it's a very good point, sir. And Hambantota is actually, it was a kind of requirement because initially we had only Colombo port, Colombo harbor. So after that there was a requirement, okay, there should be some kind of harbor port in the Hambantota area because we know that 65% of the merchant ships are passing through this line. So because of that, country wanted to have another port in Hambantota area. Actually, that at the outset, you may say that it's a challenging task to maintain two ports while maintaining Hambantota and Colombo. But Colombo is, this because of this Middle East crisis, because of this Red Sea issue, the Colombo port was highly benefited, because the operations went heavily increased, and it created and it generated a lot of revenues also for the country. And because Colombo port, it was converted to a transit port. So because of that, it was highly benefited because of this Red Sea issue. And in the meantime, the Hambantota port also, at the moment, so the administrative part is done by Chinese company, and basically because we really concerned about the security, and because of that sensitivity, so Sri Lanka Navy is handling all the security matters around the port area. So that was the one of the concern raised by even India also, and so that guarantee has been given, and in the agreement also there, that port cannot be utilized for military purposes. So it will function as a civilian harbor. So at the moment, sir, I would say that it's not a challenging job to function both the ports, and because now Colombo port has been invested by India, US, and China, 3 countries. So all these jetties are now going to be modernized and going to be converted to some kind of uplifted. They will be uplifted very soon. So the projects are now on the table, so they will start very soon. And Hambantota port will run and administered and managed by this Chinese company and under the supervision of Sri Lankan Navy. So at the moment, so I don't see it's going to be a kind of challenging task for Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. And I can see that there are a couple of hands up. So let me start with Air Marshal Gokhale. Could we get a microphone to Air Marshal Gokhale in front, and then we go to the person at the back. Let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then also please do mention to which of the panelists, or if all the panelists are being asked the question. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Gautam, and wonderful presentation by all 3 of them. My question also is to Colonel Herath. 2 months ago, I read in the media that there's going to be a land bridge between India and Sri Lanka to the somewhere where the Adam Bridge at the moment is. What is your views on that?
Could we take a couple of questions, Colonel Herath, and then answer? There's a hand at the back in the middle row, and then one more at the back there. The left-hand side seems to have many more questions than the right-hand side, so you need some catching up, I guess.
Good morning. My name is Group Captain Purohit. My question is to Ms. Namrata. One has read about the Nepalese misgivings and concerns about India's Agniveer scheme. So my question is that has China exploited these concerns or misgivings about our Agniveer scheme vis-a-vis Nepal? If so, how? And what are your recommendations for India to counter it? Thank you.
Thank you. There's one more hand up there. Yes, please. We'll take that third question and then ask the panelists to reply.
So my name is Utkarsh Shirke. Sir, my question is, so what is the public sentiment about China and Sri Lanka? How do the Sri Lankan locals view this relationship?
He didn't get the last question. Could you just repeat the question?
So the question is, how do the Sri Lankan locals view the relationship between China and Sri Lanka? What is the public sentiment about it?
Okay, thank you. So we'll do Colonel Herath first and then Namrata.
Sir, about your question, sir, about it is land connectivity between Sri Lanka and India. So this is on the table at the moment. There are certain suggestions have come up to the table. So President just put it on the table, and so far a detailed study has not been done. So since you asked about my personal opinion, sir, what my opinion is, this has to be properly evaluated by both the countries, especially concerning about the security posture. And after do a thorough study only, this idea should be facilitated. That is my personal opinion. But it's on the table, but no any firm decision has been taken on that. Did I ask your question, sir? Then regarding the public sentimental about China, so actually, I think you can remember I mentioned about during the conflict with the LTT. So that time there were certain Security Council resolutions against Sri Lanka, passed down against Sri Lanka. So that time, actually, Russia and China both came together. And that sentiment playing a kind of positive among, it was playing kind of positive attitude among public, but the moment the moment country's economy collapsed, that time actually people, I think, they expected something more from China, but I think, according to my personal opinion, we did not get what we expected, the support assistance. So that time, Indian Prime Minister came forward and he donated 3.8 billion in order to go ahead with the basic needs. And that was kind of public sentiments at the moment playing among public people, and that's the issue. And during the conflict period, so people had some kind of more positive attitude about China. And the moment economy collapsed, so people expected something more. And I mentioned that at the debt restructuring process, China was a bit reluctant at the initial part, but later on they agreed. So I think you can understand how it plays.
I think last year also we discussed it that China had actually given one of the China study centers to research that why Gorkhas actually joined the Indian armies. Like they had actually given 30 lakh in Nepalese rupees for that. But after the Agniveer scheme, there were a couple of articles that were published that the Chinese army would actually recruit the Gorkhas. And those articles were published in the Nepalese media also, and there were a couple of Chinese language media articles also that said that, if India will not employ the Gorkhas, the Chinese army would. But I didn't see that it was, splashed all over, or there were, a lot of articles written in the Nepalese media. There were a few articles, and most of them were actually the media houses that were that have been on the payrolls of the Chinese for some time. But as such, it was not, I would not say that all the media, and there was a huge issue in Nepal, especially triggered by the Chinese, because your question was how the Chinese, played it. So the Chinese, of course, a couple of articles were published, but at least in that arena, I didn't see a lot of, things that actually the Chinese could push, like there were no protest and all that. The Chinese did that, but there were articles regarding that in the Chinese media and also in the Nepalese media, like I said. So this was the only, reaction from the Chinese.
Good. Let's take a next round of questions. I can see some hands on this side of the... Yes, please.
My question is to Dr. Alvit. I am Colonel Gulshan Mungia, pursuing the RSP program in Pune University. So, Dr. Alvit, I would like to ask you that how does the ill treatment of the Muslim Uyghurs affect the Arab countries dealing with China? Does it affect, or are they just turning a blind eye? That's the question.
Let's take another couple of questions. There was a hand at the back, right there, last or second last row. And then one on this side.
My name is Om Vailkar, and my question is to Namrata ma'am. Ma'am, you mentioned that China acts as a bully to Nepal. Is it so? Then why does Nepal still aligns with China when it has option to align with India? And what compulsions does Nepal have when it comes to China?
Okay. And there's a question on this side. There's a hand up. Yes, please.
Hello. Myself, Saurabh Davankar. I have two questions, one for Colonel Herath and one for the chairperson. What made Indian neighboring countries to take such anti-Indian activities in terms of military and investments, even though at the end they know that they had to take India's help? Or is it with India's less efforts? And the second question, that why India has to counter these policies every time? Why we can't be the front runners? Thank you.
So we'll take those three questions. I think the first one was addressed to Namrata, the second one to Colonel Herath, and the third one to me. So, and I'd very much like to talk about the question that you just raised. Thank you very much. Yes, please, you wanted to add something? Oh, yes, to Alvait also. I'm sorry, to Alvait also. So, Alvait, maybe we start with you.
Thank you, sir, for that question. I think that's a very important question with regard to the treatment of the Muslims in the Uyghur region, particularly in the XAR. But there was some concerns being raised by some of the Middle Eastern countries, including Turkey, and also some from the Gulf. But that did not lead to any major escalation of political feud or differences between the two countries, because they have agreed, with a conscious kind of an agreement, to keep aside these issues and go for more strategic components of the bilateral partnerships. So they have, this is a very important topic which is being discussed, in the region also. We have seen the fate of personalities like Jamal Khashoggi, a few years ago. The Saudi, certain differences, when they see that there are more to gain out of those interactions. So I would put it that way, but it's not that these topics are not discussed. It is being discussed, and Turkey is also a very good example in that regard. They had that issue with the Chinese government, but look at the economy of Turkey right now. They would want to, that's also the reason why they had warm up to UAE and Saudi Arabia, even to Israelis also. Because the economy is not doing well, and they were willing to, leave aside all the differences and go for some real-time engagements with these economic weights in the region.
Okay, I'll tell you that how we're discussing this, because you said if they are being bullied by the Chinese, why are they still aligning with the Chinese? Now the thing is, when you analyze it and when you look at it, now China has made really deep inroads, and there's this Madan Bhandari Technological University that has been established. And with the the funding is coming from the Chinese government. Now this, before even the parliament could endorse it, this university's proposal, the construction had already started. Now the Chinese are also funding, you have to understand, the civil servants, the students, large sections of the Nepalese society, especially the elite. So they're also controlling the narrative that is going on, in Nepal. And initially, of course, the alignment was to have another option. India was there, but to have another option. But now the tentacles of the Chinese are so deep that you see, if you go to Thambel, you actually see all the signboards in Chinese. Now, initially, of course, it was, like I said, to have a better option. But the Chinese have actually gone very deep. I think the Nepalese even didn't comprehend it themselves, that it will actually come to this effect. All the money conversion, all the restaurants, all the hotels in Thambel, which is, the hub of, the Nepalese economy, everything is controlled by the Chinese. You go to any shop, all the shopkeepers actually converse in, Chinese. And like I spoke about this university, the China study centers, some of course are officially that we know and we can count, but and most of them have teachers that are actually Chinese sponsored. They are subsidized by the Chinese government. Most of them have studied in China, they have returned. Then they have, like this Erniko Society, they have China-Nepal Friendship Society. Most of the people there are actually Nepalese who have studied in Chinese. So we also have to understand the influence that Chinese have and how they are controlling the narrative, and how people within the Nepalese establishment are also supporting it. It's only like we were told that the economic advisor to the PM was actually appointed, the person that was appointed was a Chinese choice. So that is the kind of, deeply that they have gone into it. I think the Nepalese also, like I said, did not comprehend, and now they are, of course, seeing all this. But the communist parties, both the parties, are also being, they have sessions with the Communist Party of, study sessions with the Communist Party of China. And, the Chinese, what the Chinese are doing, they're trying to, like I said, keep them united, at least in Nepal. So, the Nepalese, started it maybe as an option, but now, of course, the tentacles are so deep that it's really difficult for them, to pull out.
Actually, every the country has the sovereignty, so any country has the right to go for any decision in respect of their national interest. So, only thing is here, what we need to understand here, it doesn't mean that Sri Lanka has to take permission from India for everything. But only thing is the open communication is very important. So, if we look at the history, so we need to learn lessons from the history. If the history is repeating, what I believe it means that we have not really read the history. So we should not repeat the history. That misunderstanding, miscalculation, that is we should not allow that to happen. So that transparency, whatever the activities or whatever the engagement Sri Lanka is going to deal, that has to be transparent. And only thing is, as a country, it's Sri Lanka. I think it's a diplomatically, Sri Lanka should be able to update and inform or just have some through diplomatic channel. So what's going on? And we know that everyone knows that India is concerned about their security. So we saw during when the Chinese research vessels had the port call. So we had that. There were a lot of articles. I think most of you must have read it. So during that research vessels port call, what we did, we accompanied those research vessels, accompanied the Sri Lankan Navy crew members, and NARA, National Aquatic and Research Agency members, and even the university students. So all together they accompanied. So that's how they conducted research. That actually, in order to prevent any kind of mistrust. So here, what I believe is that open dialogue and the clear communication and transparency is important when we are dealing with China. So, and as I said, President guaranteed that Sri Lanka will not engage any act with any country when the Indian security is compromised. So that guarantee is there. Thank you.
Thank you to all three speakers, and maybe because there was one question directed at me, let me spend a little time on what my thoughts are on that very interesting question. Thank you for asking it, that why is it that India is always playing catch up vis-a-vis China, especially in our neighborhood? And I think the answer to that is quite simple, that there is, you have to look at the fact on the ground that today China is a 17 or 18 trillion dollar economy, India is a $4 trillion economy. But having said that, we are approaching this whole issue asymmetrically. We have many advantages in our neighborhood which the Chinese don't have. The advantage that they have is deep pockets, and they have no shortage of throwing money and throwing, development assistance at countries across the world. The second point I'd like to make is that, this kind of economic muscle and economic power which the Chinese are doing in South Asia is not just in South Asia. They're doing it all over the world. So they're doing it in the Middle East, as Alvait has taken pains to explain to us. They're doing it in Europe. They're buying huge numbers of assets in Europe. They're doing it in the United States. They're doing it in East Asia, Southeast Asia, etc. So this is only part of their growing economic influence across the world, and which is the topic of the seminar and symposium that we are holding. But I think what you have to also keep in mind is that India itself has become we are giving a lot more development assistance to many of our neighboring countries and even beyond. And the other point, we heard Colonel Herat speak about how India was quick to offer assistance when Sri Lanka was in an economic turmoil, in an economic situation which was very difficult for them. And that was one example which I think you have to keep in mind, and which links with my earlier ideas that, when you draw a balance sheet, you have to do both the pros and the cons, the advantages and the disadvantages. And I would also like to say to do this asymmetrically, and will be able to do it much more effectively. So I think you're absolutely right. So far, maybe we have been playing catch up, But I think the day is not very far when we will, be the leaders, and other countries, whether it's China or maybe anyone else, may be the followers or the, second in line, where these development assistance projects and assistance projects to countries in our neighborhood and beyond are concerned. So I don't know if we have answered all your questions. And I think Alvait wants to make one more point, and we'll take one last round of questions because we have the time after Alvait has had his word.
Thank you, sir. See, when it comes to the growing footprints of China in the region, that is Middle East, one area I would like most of us to keep an eye is the maritime domain, because that is something which they are increasingly eyeing on. In the last 5.5, 6 months' time, they have had 2 rounds of bilateral exercises and trilateral exercises, the last one being conducted just a few days ago, involving Iran, China, and Russia. And at the same time, they had 1 round of exercises with the Pakistan recently. So that is one area we need to keep an eye on. And also, there was some major breakthrough about 25-year agreement of 400 billion in, investments the Chinese is going to do in. Nobody has an idea of the details of what those 400 billion agreement entail. So I'm sure there would be quite a few components pertaining to military security also. And this dynamics will largely depend on the unfolding geopolitical scenarios in the region in terms of the relations between the Middle Eastern countries and the US and Russia, US and China. All of them will also have an impact on what the Chinese are doing in the region. So that's my observation, sir.
So let's have 2 last questions, and there are 4 hands. No, there are 7 or 8 hands up, but I can recognize Dr. Kiran Karnik and I yield the floor to him. We'll make it 3 last questions, but let's start with Dr. Kiran Karnik, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First question to Namrata. Namrata, you mentioned 3 countries, and I was wondering whether you also want to make any comments on 2 of our other neighbors, Myanmar and Afghanistan. In both cases, it's an odd situation because morally we don't particularly like the regimes there, but there's real politics, and I don't know, given the Chinese growing influence there, Myanmar certainly, but particularly Afghanistan, where we would, as Ambassador said, in a different context, have a natural advantage, what it means. And the second question, briefly to all that, but Ambassador, to you also, is, it seems the perception, at least wise, is that China scored a bit of a diplomatic coup with getting the Iran-Saudi Arabia agreement. Now, our relations with both countries have been good, and again, did India fall back? And looking ahead, not looking back, isn't there some role which India should be playing more actively? Again, with 2 countries, 2 peoples that have been our friends, Israel and Palestine, instead of sitting back and just abstaining or voting one way one time and one way the other.
Okay, yes, the lady there in the corner.
Good morning. I am Riya Bansal, a student of Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. A wonderful and insightful presentation by all the panelists. We spoke about West Asia, Nepal, Bangladesh, and we heard the Sri Lankan point of view. I would request any or all of the panelists to please throw some insight on the Chinese footprint in the Indo-Pacific region and what exactly is India doing to tackle the situation there. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take one last question from the back. There are a number of hands up. I'm sorry we can't fit you all in, but there's a lady there. If I could request her to ask her question or make her comment.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Ritika. I'm the first year master student at Symbiosis School of International Studies. The panel discussed Chinese footprints in Nepal, Maldives, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and West Asia. My question is regarding the Latin American region and to the panel in general. Will Chinese presence in the Latin America affect India-Latin America relations given China's heavy investment in the infrastructure and projects in the region, while India is also showing interest in Latin American region for energy resources? Thank you.
Thank you. So those are 3 questions. Let's start with Namrata, then go to Alvait, and then I'll also join in to the question that Dr. Karnik asked.
Thanks, sir. Actually, I've not done much on China's influence in Myanmar and Afghanistan. We do read about it, but I've not done research as such on it because I've been focusing on South Asia. So I don't want to say anything that, I've not done research on. So, but that can be the next project, Afghanistan and Myanmar. Start looking at it.
And this is regarding, this Myanmar issue, I think it has created some kind of avenue to learn something about this crisis. The lesson, we should not leave anyone behind, and we should not leave based on the political view or any other view, considering any other view, any country. Now it has happened to Myanmar. Now, most of the countries, especially like Bangladesh, I think even India, did not deal with Myanmar in an adequate manner. Now the repercussions are coming. Now things are changing in the Myanmar ground. So if we had engaged with Myanmar military junta or whatever, actually it could have facilitated something better than this. Now none of the countries engage adequately with Myanmar. Now the crises are facing, especially there are a number of rebels are fighting, and there is a possibility of cross-border these rebels to Bangladesh or maybe India. So there are a lot of security concerns. Had we dealt with this junta properly, so it would have facilitated something, and we could have reacted in a better manner. And that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Colonel Herat. I'll ask Alvait and then I'll come in.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful question. I completely agree that Iran is a very important country for us. But if you look at the pattern of our relationship with Tehran, it has been a little bit uneven since last many decades. But I would not say that we have completely lost out to the Iranians. The fact that we continue to maintain the channel of communication, including the high-level visits to the country, still have still says that like the country is still significant. In fact, of course, we need to do more in terms of our engagements. But at the same time, there is also this nowadays, you weight the strategic values of these countries nowadays, looking from your foreign policy point of view, who can offer what at what point in time. For that matter, we are in the process of diversifying our sources, particularly oil and energy, because of certain complications and certain obligations that we need to bear in mind. We are not buying much oil, any oil from Iran at the moment right now, but we are relying on other available sources. Of course, the West Asian suppliers continue to remain the top, and then US, and then you have the Russian oil right at the moment. But Russia, but for that matter, I would say Iran, we also need to look at the kind of the posture that Iran has in the region, and in terms of its international outlook, in terms of its international relations, and what kind of implications or impediments could we incur out of relations with, continuing relations with countries like Iran. But I would not say that we have completely abandoned Iran. There are a lot more. We in fact need to engage a lot more, and we are doing that. And I don't see in the times to come that it will completely slip out of our hands. With regard to the Palestinian issues, I think we are looking at the region very closely. It's a classic example of, again, diplomatic balancing, which we have come following for the last many years. We have done that in terms of, it's not that, again, we have not abandoned the Palestinian issue. It depends on from what spectrum you're looking at. We are giving all kinds of support, but of course, if there are political supports that needs to be given. We have done that in the form of statements giving out. But do we need more? That remains, to be discussed more. What could we be doing more in order to support the Palestinian cause? But at the same time, we are also mindful of the other weight. The other countries have to, we have to be mindful of the other countries' strategic weight also.
Thank you. There was one question about India and Latin America. I was wondering if any one of you would like to take it. Otherwise, I'd just say that, what you're saying is right, that right now Latin America is really, really far in terms of distance and reach for India. But as India's economy grows, we will definitely have more to do with Latin America, as we are seeing even now. So I think since none of us really is an expert on Latin America, we'll stop there. But I'd like to end the session by coming back to the question that Dr. Kiran Karnik asked. And he said that has India lost an opportunity by not playing a mediator role in some of the conflicts which are happening around the world. Dr. Karnik, my approach to this issue is I think India at this moment correctly is focusing the energies of its government and its people on fast-paced economic growth. That's where we need to put our energies and not in trying to not in trying to sort out some issues between Ukraine and Russia or between the Palestinians and the Israelis. All that will happen in the future once India's GDP and its per capita GDP too grows and we have the economic clout to back any of the diplomatic muscle which is required. So I think it's best summed up in my opinion, and you may disagree with me of course, but it's best summed up in my opinion by the song from Gully Boy which says, Hamara time bhi aayega. And I'll close the session there. Thank you very much for being a great audience and thank you for being so patient.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Gautam Bambavale, for chairing this session. And thank you, Ms. Namrata, Colonel Herat, and Dr. Alvaid for being the panelists for this session. And we take a short break for tea, that is till 12:15, and then we'll start the next round round table, that is India-China, the road ahead. So 15 minutes tea break, and we'll meet again. Thank you. And thank you for the good question-answer session that we had, and a lovely presentation by the panelists. Thank you. Hello. Yeah, good afternoon. I would request all of you all to be seated for the next round table that we are going to proceed with. Those who have had their tea, I request you all to come to the hall and be seated. We are running short of time, so I request all of you to come and be seated for the next round table, that is India-China, the road ahead. Once again, I request everyone to be seated for the next round table, India-China, the road ahead. The chairperson, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, retired, PVSM, AVSM, VM, President of CAS. And the speakers are Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, VM, retired, Lieutenant General R.P. Kalita, PVSM, UYSM, AVSM, SM, VSM, retired, Vice Admiral Anup Singh, PVSM, Vice Admiral Anup Singh, PVSM, AVSM, NM, retired, and Ambassador Gautam Bambabule, retired. May I request all of them to come on the dais? Chairperson, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale. Speakers, Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, Lieutenant General R.P. Kalita, Vice Admiral Anup Singh, and Ambassador Gautam Bambabule. Thank you. Are we all ready? So let's begin with the round table, India-China, the road ahead. Over to Chairperson, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, sir.
General Mahajan, could you just give a little, the typical army command? Kelkar sir, please move up next to Ranade sir. Dr. Kelkar, पुढे या ना इथे. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are on to our last session before the valedictory, or a concluding session as we may call it. It's now the 77 years of India's independence and 76 of formation of China. Starting from Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai to enemy number one, I think we have come a long way. The 1962, which triggered my elder brother and me to join the services, the Chinese and Indians have had, after that, really speaking, never good relations. So many border and other agreements, but none of them have been agreed to really in print. We have had the recent standoff where 21 talks have taken place so far as of date, 21 times. The army and then, of course, MEA also has been involved, both sides. But troops are still there and there is no chance of withdrawal for the time being. As a matter of fact, we have inducted another 10,000 into the Ladakh sector. And so is the case with our border agreement, which NSA level, 25 of them have taken place, but out of the 14 countries that China borders, India prominently does not have, as yet, a border delineation agreement. They have also a similar problem with Vietnam, but otherwise most of the other neighbors, they've been able to have a demarcation of border, which is very important. Because in our case, we have found them creeping forward. And then finally, of course, it's come to a Galwan, a tragic, loss of life on both sides maybe. But that is how the relationship has changed over the years. While the trade has been growing, and as a matter of fact, even now when the relationships are really speaking sour, the trade is more than what it was earlier. But that is because the whole world has relied on China for the supply chain management, including the containers. We don't make containers, so whether all the containers are being provided actually by the Chinese companies, and likewise, I can give you many examples. Of course, now India has woken up to an extent. There's a nice book which was written from Pune International Center, and one of the authors is Ambassador Bombawale in my panel today. We have a lot to do, and I'm sure that in this particular session, we have experts, 3 military experts and 1 from diplomacy. What my plan is that I would request each of the speakers to speak for about 15 to 18 minutes. I might ask myself a question if required, but otherwise we'll throw it open to the audience. So the first on the list is Air Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, a very erudite speaker and a writer. He was in the Center for Air Power Studies after his retirement. One of the pioneering helicopter pilots who was operating in many, many years in our northeast and as well as on our Siachen. And he writes very regularly into various newspapers. I'm not going to elaborate that further, but before I give you the charge, I just wanted to mention about the Chinese rocket forces. I don't know who really controls them. I'm told CMC does directly, and it doesn't come under Army or the Air Force. But that is something that maybe I thought you might like to cover, and as well as their inroads into near and outer space where there is problem of weaponization of space. The space treaty does not allow the nuclear weapons to be stationed, but weaponization of space, as yet, there is no agreement. So over to Air Marshal Bahadur.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jai Hind and good morning. Good afternoon. We'll come straight to, ab isko band kar dijiye. I'll tell you when to put it on. Regarding India-China relations, to me it appears that the future is a bit turbulent. Basically because both are old civilizations, proud civilizations. And though there may be an asymmetry presently in various sectors, India is not a pushover. We're catching up pretty fast. So the famous theory of Graham Allison of Thucydides' trap, it was in the news roughly 5 years back, and everybody commented after his article came out, saying that an emerging power threatens to destabilize the equilibrium that exists with an established power. So between India and China, who's the emerging power, or is there a relative grading of the emergence of the two nations? And if we were to say that we are the emerging power versus an established power, or going to be an established power, that is China, would we like to destabilize as per that theory? To my understanding, I don't think this would happen because we have got various other priorities, and that's brought out by very many speakers. The first priority, of course, is to get the economic upliftment of our people. So while we are at it, it's important that we don't get pushed and that our hard power backs the political leadership and the diplomatic leaders in establishing India on the world stage. So what would China like to do in such a situation? Since we do not have expansionist tendencies, they will try to sort of keep us destabilized. Now, that has happened for the last 30 odd years through proxies, through our insurgencies, especially in the northeast, and through Pakistan. Now, Pakistan somehow is not, in the last 5 to 6 years, in our dialogue, in our discussions vis-a-vis an adversary, as we put it. Maybe, to my understanding, China would like to get Pakistan back into, as a front state, to keep us occupied, which we've managed. We've ensured that it is not exactly a direct threat as we used to see it 10 to 15 years back. And then what we need to do is re-establish hard power dominance by redefining the impact of air power. I'll talk air power, and sir, I will take your points about the rocket force and space a little later. Since there are army and naval experts on the panel, so I'll just talk of air power. Can I just have the slide, please? All right. What we don't understand, we understand aircraft, bombs, missiles, etc. But there is something called virtual presence of air power. In 1962, why didn't we use the Indian Air Force? Because there was a threat that if we use, they'll come and bomb our cities, especially Calcutta. Nothing happened. No aircraft flew, no fighters flew from either side. But there was a virtual threat. It deterred us from using that. All right, so air power has a chilling effect, a deterrence effect, when we are talking of hard power. So we need to establish ourselves, our Air Force, our air power, to that level where it is happened. So on maps, you see army, Pultons, the brigades, the divs, having spheres of influence. You have flags, you have little radii marked on that. Similarly, the Navy, though a little faster, but still way short of what any air power of any nation can do. It's marked in concentric circles. And since air power can move from one place to another and start operating from another place, those circles move with it. So this presence of air power, this virtual presence, shifts and brings its impact on larger areas depending on the type of assets you've got. So if we were to, next slide. No, it's not happening. All right. So if we were to go back to what happened 4 years back, roughly. The Air Force or the Indian air power got activated. We airlifted troops, we airlifted tanks, the C-17s, the IL-76s. They all moved en masse, literally, to our forward airfields at Leh and Thois. And our assets, the fighting assets, all the fighters, Sukhois, Rafale, they all moved. So did the light combat helicopter and the Chinooks for the heavy lift. So all these activities happened. And the aim of doing that was to tell them that, listen, we have the air power. And we're talking about 4 years back. So the advantage that we have, this is Leh, just to get a general sense of the vast dispersals. And these are this is a Sukhoi up there, flying in Leh. And then we had the light combat helicopter, which was still still not inducted in, but I think 4 assets which were there were deployed over there. So the Air Force or the Ministry of Defense went full bore in installing. And it's important to understand this, and why I'm bringing this up is now this is a slightly old slide, but it conveys what I just want to indicate. If you look at the Chinese bases, roughly 4 years back, you had Kashgar, you had Hotan in eastern Ladakh area, and as you came further to the east, you had those airfields which are marked there, Shigaste, Nengchi, and one odd more. Whereas when we talk of the Indian dispositions, the Indian airfields, they're all over the foothills, all over, starting from Thois in J&K to Leh, a whole lot of airfields in Punjab, in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar. And as you move eastward, you had Bagdogra, Tezpur, Jorhat, Guwahati, the works, and all at low altitudes. So most of you understand that having an airfield at a low altitude gives your aircraft a higher payload capability, a higher throw weight, more ordnance you can put across, which the Chinese airfields didn't have, because they are at 12,000 feet and above, most of them, not all, most. So if you noticed that after that big incursion at Galwan and the activities that happened, there's a sudden silence. And the media is full of reports that they've used these 3 to 4 years to build up their air defense system. They have made more helipads. They have made parallel runways. They had no hardened shelters at their airfields, which they have now got, which they have made use these 4 years. What was the aim? The whole aim of that exercise was to nullify, because they knew that if it came to war, if it had come to war in 2020 or around so, it would have been the Indian air power or the Indian Air Force which would have gone across and carried the war to there. And their air defense in that area had a lot of holes. The airfields were far spaced out. They were not self-supported. If you knocked out on an airfield for 2 hours, then aircraft that may have taken off from there wouldn't have a place to land, literally. Okay, so they've used these 4 years, and what if they tried to do is to reduce that deterrence value, the virtual presence of the Indian Air Force over their territory. That's what they have tried. Of course, we are aware of that, but I thought I'll just bring this out to explain why and how air power comes into the equation. So let's not forget the eastern sector. We all keep talking Ladakh because that's where the action happened. General Kalita is there, and he would know much more than I know. But all the airfields that are up there have got our fighters, have got modern assets, our SAMs, surface-to-air missile, and so many more things which I don't know. I retired 10 years back, 11 years back. But the eastern sector is important too. And we have ensured that the potency doesn't reduce. So basically what it is, China trying to reduce the chilling effect of the Indian air power. So what should we do in the midterm? We're talking of assets, all right. The Chinese have a very organized defense industry. They are more or less now self-sufficient. Whether they have begged, borrowed, or stolen plans doesn't affect us because we have to face them. I mean, that's not an excuse. They steal. Okay, they have stolen, but we are facing the brunt. So we have to make sure that we tackle them. So our defense industry is coming up, but it will take time. You know, there is all the armed forces, the three of us, would like to be modern as on date today. But any development of a system takes years, decades. So there is in between a gap, which we have to balance out between buying and producing within the own country till you become potent yourself. So talking of the force multipliers that we have, the AVACs, the FRAs for long range strike, the integrated controls, the air defense control system that we have got, and finally, modern war would be a system versus system engagement. How good is your system versus theirs? It's not one J-20 of theirs versus one Rafale or one Sukhoi of us. It is a system fighting a system. How well have you put your cogs into that system and are operating that system? The cogs are important, of course, but all modern wars will be systems versus systems. That we have to take into account. And that's where we get into the 2 points which the chair talked about, the rocket forces and the development of space. Yes, space, there is a outer space treaty, the OST, which bars weaponization of, that is, placing weapons in outer space. But transiting weapons through outer space, there is no bar on that. Using outer space to control weapons, or say nuclear weapons or whatever, there is no bar on that. So that is the lacuna that is being used. But I personally feel that it's just a matter of time where people will find, flaws in the argument to position weapons in space. To my understanding, it hasn't happened as such. But the threat from space, via space, exists. And the rocket forces, yes, that's a potent threat. As the recent wars have brought out that when you're talking of not only the ballistic missiles, but you're talking of cruise missiles and that famous thing called UAV or drones that everybody is talking of. But all these, basically what are they doing? The UAV certainly everybody is talking of because it's coming through the medium of air and reducing, and it's part of that virtual effect of air, virtual effect of air power. It's a matter of time before we get the antidote, a good antidote to that, and we are working on that. So, having talked of the indigenous industry, what should be our outlook? For the midterm, I feel we will still have to depend on certain systems that we will have to get from outside, even as we develop our indigenous industry. But the long-term answer is obviously indigenous. It has to be the way China has become almost indigenous. They have almost mastered the fighter jet engine. Their J-20 is now flying with the WS-15 engine, both of their engines. So we have to get there very quickly. And on the geopolitical and diplomatic front, in this midterm, we have to back up our diplomats, our politicians with the hard power that they require to get their arguments across. And that can only happen with joint operations. This panel is as joint as you can think of. And it was so refreshing to hear the CDS yesterday when he talked of air power and said it's not a support service. I mean, good. And it was very refreshing. I'll stop at that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahadur. Our next speaker is General Kalita, a very distinguished Army officer. PVSM, UISM, AVSM, SM, VSM, is anything left out? He just retired as the Army commander from the East, so he knows the whole Northeast, as Air Marshal Bahadur was speaking about. And he's from 9 Kumaon, and his son is also in Kumaon. He's basically from Assam, and he lives there, so he knows what this threat can be in the Northeast. There is a lot of, on his CV, he's been involved in a lot of CI operations. He has a bags of experience. So, General, I had, apart from you giving, I thought I'll just give you a couple of pointers from my side. Yesterday, I think Dr. Karnik mentioned about 2014 when Russia had taken over charge of Crimea. But I think before that, in 2008, there was a Russo-Georgia war. And that lasted just 10 days. There was cyber, but more importantly, 2 republics were created, called the Ossetia and Abkhazia. Now, I know that I just heard from the Director General Border Roads that in the next 5 years, we'll be covering the entire Sino-India border with all the possible infrastructure projects. But you think, I would just want to put this into your, that could they do some sort of incursion, or maybe you can do cyber warfare and get some of these villages onto them, and they just occupy that, and republics like what they have been discussing in Georgia, they just declare them as independent. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for that question, sir, which I'll tackle towards the end of my talk. Firstly, I wish to thank Mr. Jaydev Ranade, the organizers, and the Pune University for giving me this opportunity of sharing my views exactly 2.5 months after my retirement. Over the last 3 sessions, we have heard a number of eminent speakers. We have touched upon various facets of China as it impacts us as a country. So I'm going to confine my talk towards the land border management, which has the potential, as you all know, of escalating into a major conflict between India and China. I'm going to talk more about this as we go along. However, as we know, as the tensions persist and the sporadic confrontation remain, it becomes paramount to evaluate the effectiveness of the existing border agreements as also the existing border management mechanisms that has been in place by both the countries, and try and delineate the potential framework for peace along the line of actual control. Whatever views and observations I'm going to make, they are based on my personal experiences of dealing with India-China border over the last 2 years till 31st December of 2023. So I'm going to touch upon 3 important issues. The first one is, what is the present situation on the India-China border in brief? Then the challenges that are associated with the border management, which are faced by our soldiers on a day-to-day, on a routine basis. And then thereafter come up with some sort of recommended way ahead for us as far as land border management is concerned. We know that the boundary dispute between India and China has witnessed a surge of military tensions, exemplified by the long Doklam standoff, as also the Galwan incident, which took place in 2020. A comprehensive resolution formula, including disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction of forces, still awaits. There are competing claims, which you all know, and differing perceptions which complicate permanent resolution of the border dispute. Now, if you look back, the period from 1988 to 2012 saw numerous efforts from both the countries to try and arrive at some sort of border resolution. These efforts included signing of various agreements, which started off, of course, with the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement, BPTA as it is popularly called, in 1993, the CBMA of 1996, as also the protocols for modalities for implementation of the CBMs. These agreements laid down the principles for maintaining peace and tranquility in borders. Though certain achievements were made, like the deliberations or discussion at the special representative level, the starting of the WMCC, as also the border meetings between the troops, the border guarding troops, certain important facts remain. The challenges such as clarifying the line of actual control, which did not happen, and the talks on reducing the force level on border remained unresolved. So what's happening now? If we look at the events that has taken place post-annexation of Tibet by China, the salami slicing technique, which we keep talking about, has been going on since then. However, the border patrols escalated, the confrontation between border patrols escalated in scope and scale with more frequent face-off from 2013. And the first troop deaths in 1975 took place in 2020 during the Galwan incident. Now, what are the reasons for that? The superior infrastructure and the forward basing of Chinese troops right after the Doklam standoff, that is in 2017. After that, they went in a major way for focused infrastructure development, as also forward basing of the troops based on the lessons learned by them during the Doklam standoff. The new normal which has been created by PLA along the borders with the infrastructure development with main focus on dual use infrastructure, which includes those famous Chinese border villages which you all talk of, then continuous application of creeping tactics within the domain of gray zone warfare, the cartographic aggression by changing names of places in Arunachal Pradesh, all these have contributed towards increasing the mistrust between both the border guarding forces. And what has happened is now the troops on both sides, there is always a fear of escalation of slightest provocation. So what I think Nitin Gokhale had mentioned yesterday by one statement, that an incident at tactical level has a strategic ramification. That needs to be understood in the right perspective. And which, in fact, which I'm going to talk about later, puts a huge strain and it's a big challenge for the border management troops. The enactment of the land border law and adoption of the layered security system, which were evident during the border management and which we saw across the border, its manifestation in various forms were seen actually on ground. In the Eastern Command, we had carried out a detailed analysis and study, and it was quite evident about how both this land border law and the layered security system has manifested on ground. And they are clearly indicative of continued PLA's intransigence. The manifestation of 3Ws, which you also talked about yesterday, is another factor which is contributing to the new normal that has been created. It is also evident from the changed behavior pattern by the PLA. While earlier times they used to conduct training in the depth areas, those designated training areas which you all are aware of, which was far away from the line of actual control. But since the Galwan incident, the conduct of training shifted towards the forward zones as well. Obviously, they are aimed at sending certain overt signals to us. They also carry out patrolling in accessible points with a very, very friendly interaction, with a friendly demeanor to depict normalcy. That's one more aspect which you see manifesting on ground. And the third is they continue to display aggressive behavior in claimed areas like Yangtze and Asafila and the other areas in eastern Ladakh as well. So what happens is, what are the main challenges in the border management? We know that there are competing claims, there are differing perceptions about the line of actual control, and there is presence of large number of combatants on both sides. So any particular miscalculation, any tactical action that may be done at the behest of some junior leader has the potential to escalate into a major incident, what we saw in Galwan happening. So that's the basic threat which remains the main challenge as far as the border guarding forces are concerned. While during border management, I also must admit that both sides also try and adhere to the laid down protocols and agreements in trying to diffusing certain emerging situations. But will it be successful at all times? That's a question which we have to ask for ourselves, and that's what we are more worried about. So, basic challenge, that being the basic challenge, the finer thing, I think, is the lack of mutual trust. The trust deficit which exists between both the countries at all levels, whether it's at the political level, whether it's at diplomatic level, or at a military level. I think that's a major challenge to normalize our relationship. The differing perceptions of the LEC, that has always led to misunderstanding and confrontation between two sides. The present Chief of Army Staff, General Manoj Pandey, had recently said that attempted transgressions remain potential trigger for escalations, which continue to happen in certain areas of eastern Ladakh as well as in the Arunachal Pradesh in Eastern Command. While our troops, they face a day-to-day challenge of operating in gray zone domain, and with that risk of escalation which I talked about from a minor incident to a major conflagration. So how do they handle those minor incidents? So that is something which always bothers the commanders who are dealing with the Indo-China border. There is always a dilemma in the minds of the commanders. What sort of authority should be delegated to the junior leaders? Whether should be carried out as far as exercising various controls are concerned. That remains a basic dilemma in the minds of all the commanders in the military that's dealing with the Indo-China border. We all are aware that there are multiple agencies that are involved in border guarding, which includes the Indian Army, of course, the Navy and Air Force, Indian Armed Forces, and apart from that, the ITBP, the State Police, there are various intelligence agencies. So the basic coordination amongst all the agencies that are involved still remains a challenge. And unity of command, I think, is one of the major challenges. So having touched upon what's happening on the border and the basic challenges, I would try and give certain recommendations. I think while a comprehensive resolution formula, which include disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction is the desired option, when it is going to happen, what are the steps that are going to lead to it, that is something for all of us, I think, to speculate. We all know that resolution of any boundary dispute can take place through either through negotiation and compromise or through third-party mediation. Whether that is applicable in the context of India and China, that's a question I think we have to answer. And to me personally, it doesn't look forthcoming in the near future, till the time the trust at the political and the diplomatic level is rebuilt. At the political and diplomatic engagement should continue. Conflict prevention mechanisms are critical, but at the same time, developing a credible deterrence along with adequate border infrastructure enhancement and modernization of forces are key. And while negotiating with Chinese, we need to negotiate from a position of strength and power and not try and capitulate. There are options. The existing protocols and agreements need to be reviewed to address the changed circumstances and the new technology that has come in. I'm referring to the new various intrusive technology that are being adhered to or used by all the forces in terms of UAVs, drones, etc. So the existing protocols do not cater for this new technology. So there is a need to definitely review the existing protocols and the SOP for the implementations of the CBMs. There are also certain measures which are required to be taken to legalize our own claim over the line of actual control or the territory that are claimed by us. In face of the 3 Ws, which has been launched by the Chinese, and legal warfare in particular. The line of actual, to strengthen our own claims, we need to seek international recognition by lobbying countries to acknowledge our position and rights under the international law. I would also at this point like to suggest to establish a domestic legal framework reaffirming sovereignty over the disputed territories. There is a requirement to conduct public diplomacy campaign to garner domestic as well as international support through media and academia outreach. The academia has a huge role to play in legalizing our own claims. By conducting various research work in the border areas, I am referring to certain amount of research work which is being currently undertaken by the Rajiv Gandhi University, which is in Itanagar. It's carrying out research on the anthropological field, trying to establish the ethnic linkages between Indians and the people who are living in the border areas of Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, so that they negate the claims based on the cultural and historical ties which the Chinese continue to make on a day-to-day basis. There is also a definite requirement to increase footprints in border areas by promoting religious and adventure tourism, as also implementing the Vibrant Village program, which had been announced by the government a couple of years back. Certain military measures which I would like to suggest, like I had mentioned earlier, we should focus on building a credible military deterrence, and wherein infrastructure development and infusion of technology should be the key. The recent rebalancing of military forces, which was carried out to refocus on the non-borders and shift certain troops from the western border, is a step in the right directions, and that has given adequate capacity to address some of the challenges that were being faced along the non-borders earlier. There is a requirement of enhancing the ISR capabilities as also the degradation capabilities in terms of long-range vectors, in terms of attack helicopters, air power, which has already been spoken of by AVM Bahadur. And all these can lead to strengthening of our capability enhancement and contribute towards building up a credible deterrence. The forward posturing of troops, how much troops are to be positioned in the forward areas, that's a very, very fine balance that has to be maintained. But we should have adequate troops located closer to the borders to reduce the response time and to increase deterrence against any Chinese misadventure. This includes also establishment of well-equipped post and forward bases. Finally, what I would say is, from my practical experiences, we need to adopt a proactive strategy for border management with willingness to prosecute sustained gray zone operations if required. And that's I think, the requirement of the day. This will include robust domination of areas up to own perception of the line of actual control and calibrated assertiveness along with preparations to handle any possible contingencies. Jointness and integration between all the services that has already been talked about by ABM Bahadur. There is also a requirement to strengthen the existing defensive positions with fortifications, bunkers, and other protective measures to enhance the survivability of our troops which are deployed in the border areas. We need to maintain adequate reserves with rapid deployment capabilities to reinforce the frontline units swiftly, in time, and effectively in cases of escalation. We also need to anticipate the possible collusion between China and Pakistan and have our preparations ready with two-front war, which we keep talking about. While we are doing this, we also need to invest on modernizing the weapon systems, equipment, and communication network to ensure that we attain and retain a technological edge over our adversary. For predicting China's behavior and actions, we need to develop capacity for predictive analysis using artificial intelligence and big data analytics. While doing this, we also need to conduct regular training exercises focused on mountain warfare, high-altitude warfare, and joint maneuvers to enhance readiness and preparedness along the line of actual control. The next key issue is the infrastructure development. There is a requirement to strengthen the infrastructure along the line of actual control in terms of building up the roads, strategic railways, airports, helipads, communication network, billeting, and logistics based on the new technology. There is also a need to re-evaluate defense acquisition plans to ensure that they are geared towards long-term sustenance rather than just possessing capability. Allocation of adequate funds is also a key to the defense preparedness. For synergized efforts towards infrastructure development and other capability development to meet any future challenges, a whole of nation approach is required, and in that, civil-military fusion is extremely important. There are certain critical policy and institutional dimensions which we need to look at. Firstly, it is in terms of the clearances and approval for projects which are required to be undertaken in the border areas. The ex-DG border roads is sitting here. He would agree with me about the delays that take place in various clearances while undertaking infrastructure development projects along the border. To obviate the delays, we need to have a single window clearance that must be extended to all sensitive projects which are to be constructed along the border. We see that presently there are numerous agencies that are involved in infrastructure development, whether it is border roads or NHIDCL or NHAI. So there is a requirement of some sort of coordination mechanism, and I had, during my tenure, I had suggested setting up of an empowered committee at the national level to plan and execute all the imported border infrastructure projects which are located within 100 kilometers of the line of actual control. That's important to ensure synergized effort towards development of the infrastructure. With this, I would end my talk. As far as the intrusions or the incursions or the possibility of incursions are concerned, I think that would have probably happened. That possibility existed in 60s and possibly in 70s. After we have faced a series of transgressions led or transgression initiated border escalations right from 2013, our approach towards any such possibility have matured and our preparations have evolved. And we have got, I would like to assure everyone, and particularly the MSL Gokhale, that there are adequate troops in place. We have adequate infrastructure in place to respond to any sort of situation. We have adequate eyes and ears. We have adequate visibility and transparency across the line of actual control as well to identify any such potential misadventures from the Chinese side. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Galita. Okay. So once again, I think if people haven't heard, so let me thank you, and thank you for a very reassuring talk, especially because I had raised that question. And now we come to the maritime domain, and we have an erudite speaker, Admiral Anup Singh. No, that he's lost. Admiral Anup Singh, as you know, he commanded 4 warships and been the VOCWEF of that is on the Western Fleet. And thereafter, he's been to many think tanks, including VIF, and he's written a number of articles, books. So let me not take much time because, he has to also catch a flight at 4 o'clock. So I just wanted to put 2 points into your, from my side. Is, Philippines won the case in 2016, but it seems the world hasn't supported it. And actually, Philippines even withdrew the case against China when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, islands. And second thing I wanted you to speak, everybody talks about the CPEC, but very few talk about CIMEC, the Myanmar corridor, because that is where all the refineries are, and I think we have a choke point possibility. There is also this talk the Chinese are doing with Thailand for Isthmus of Kra. So may I now request you to take the podium?
Thank you, sir, and thank you for those two questions. Let me put the timer so that nobody rings the bell. And this is generated by GPS, so nobody can challenge it. At the outset, I must thank Mr. Jayadev Ranade and Pune University, but I must profusely thank Mr. Jayadev Ranade for having kept me in his A list. My only fear is, while thanking him, is that 2 conferences of CCAS ago, I found myself for the first time in the last session. But I was the first speaker. Last year's conference in India International Center, I again found myself surviving by the skin of my teeth in the last session, and Nitin Gokhale, I remember, was chairing it. And at that time also, I had given a hint to Mr. Ranade, please keep me in your A list. I seem to be slipping. And then I got the draft final program from Namrata, which showed me in the last session as the last speaker. So, I was clenching my teeth and fingernails and saying, good Lord, this seems next time I won't be included in any conference of CCAS. And that would have meant singing in Delhi while you are having a conference here next year, Zor se jhatka laga, dheere se. Fortunately, I have been made the penultimate speaker, and Gautam is going to be the last one. Okay, let me start with the geopolitical preamble, a short one, even though I'm supposed to be speaking about the maritime domain and the navies of the 2 countries. I think from the oft-spoken term strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific, the world in our vicinity in particular, and generally across its lat and long, has now started saying there is growing strategic uncertainty, not just because of Ukraine, not just because of Gaza, but also because of forays that the Chinese are making in unknown and unexpected territories. The handshake between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brought about so secretly by China, was just one example. The next thing that China has done is something about which Xi Jinping had given a hint in 2013 when he made gestures to Kazakhstan, about $30 billion for oil and gas. And now it's gone to Kazakhstan once again, having made friends already with Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan on its periphery. Pakistan is already in its pocket for ages. They are called all-weather friends. And that a lot more is happening insofar as China's acquisition of influence, as I call it, and spread of influence now is concerned. They have gone and done a warm handshake, not now with Russia, but in 2014, when both were in trouble. The Americans were saying, how can you be militarizing or thinking of militarizing artificial islands? How can you first of all be building artificial islands? And let me say that in 2015 or 16, I think it was 2015 when Xi Jinping made his first visit to the United States, and President Barack Obama mentioned to him in his official speech that you have started making artificial islands. We only hope that you will not militarize them. And in his return speech, President Xi Jinping said, these are only to assist fishermen and other people in distress. These islands will never be militarized. 8 months down the line, 3 of those largest artificial islands had airstrips with fighter jets and with SAMs, long-range SAMs, established. So that is insofar as trust about China is concerned. We are not the only ones since 1962. And I think that needs to be embedded in our playbook forever and ever that you cannot trust China. This bhai business can be actually put in some chronicles which can be burnt. They've just, by the way, just a week ago, they've concluded the 7th edition or the 5th edition of China, Russia, Iran trilateral naval exercise, comprising of 20 ships, out of which 2 were Chinese, very large, very powerful frigates and destroyers. 2 were Russians, but the balance of them were patrol craft and corvettes from Iran. And the host Iran had one of its important flag officers giving a press conference thereafter that this was staged in the most troubled zone of the world, particularly around 3 of the 5 most strategic waterways and straits of the world. He is obviously meaning the Suez Canal, the Strait of Bab el-Mandab or Gulf of Aden, and the Strait of Hormuz, through which 40% of oil and gas traverses day in and day out. And he said that this is to bring about peace and tranquility, and we 3 nations, or words to that effect, are the only ones who can do that in this part of the world. So China is upping the ante everywhere also to tease its rival. The other thing that you've been reading between the lines almost every now and then is about China having superseded the United States Navy in numbers. It just doesn't matter. And for years I've been watching these CRS reports, Congressional Research Service reports, as well as the annual Pentagon report about the power of the Chinese military this year. And there is a sense of so much fear. What will we and the rest of the world do, because China is becoming all-powerful? 400 and 450 warships makes no sense to anybody. If the US Navy's got 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, which means there is no need for, they themselves constitute the blue water element of the Navy. That means logistic support is at a minimal required. And they've got 7 fleets across the oceans. They just don't need to fear. Insofar as ordnance and missilery, not just the nuclear warhead missilery, not just ICBMs, which can also have conventional warheads, but everything else that is packed in their ships and aircraft and strategic bombers is to be compared. Numbers don't really matter. The next thing is that the Chinese have been hemming and hawing everywhere and calling anyone who tries to make a statement or anyone who sends his minister to his own sovereign territory, they call out shots even by the junior-most spokesperson from their foreign ministry. I think silence is golden insofar as we are concerned, but the rejoinders that are coming out today and have been coming out for the last couple of, I should say, decades, not just years, are a good sign. But here I need to also bring in another aspect of the Chinese, and which we need to remember and practice whenever there is reason to retaliate. You know, since I am supposed to be talking about the maritime domain, in the year 2016, the Argentinian Coast Guard, and you know the Argentinians do not have a powerful navy or a coast guard. One vessel of theirs found within its EEZ, which is 200 nautical miles wide, but very close to its territorial waters, a Chinese fisheries vessel. Do you know the largest Chinese factory ships, they are called? Fishing processing vessels, which can sustain themselves at sea for 6 months without fueling. They process hundreds of tons of fish, and then they directly export to countries. FAO has been not saying too much, but there are many think tanks in Europe and America who've been saying that 80% of the fish harvest comes from illegal catch and others EEZ, because China's own EEZ has been overeaten. They made more than fish Amritsari out of all the fish that they catch. This Argentinian Coast Guard cutter called the Chinese vessel on radio. The Chinese responded only with a short snippet and turned away. And thereafter, when the Chinese Coast Guard continued to pursue it, the cutter, very surprisingly, the fishing vessels very surprisingly turned 180 degrees and came to ram the Coast Guard cutter of the Argentinian Coast Guard. This was a very dicey maneuver and unconventional maneuver, unacceptable in law, and therefore the Argentinians did what they are supposed to do in white vessels. They first fired a shot across the bows. When the Chinese fishing vessel realized that this was only a threat in being and not in practice, they continued to come at right angles to the Argentinian Coast Guard. So the Argentinian Coast Guard vessel did what was just right. It aimed at the vessel at short range, fired 4 or 5 rounds with its heavy gun, and the Chinese fishing vessel sank in minutes. 32 crew members were rescued by the Argentinian Coast Guard and taken home. Not a whimper of protest from the Chinese. The South Koreans, who are so wary about the Chinese and wary about talking ill of the South China Sea practice, did a similar thing with an F-15 fighter jet against, if you've heard about, I think her name is Susi Pujatsini, the Indonesian fisheries minister, who is now no more the fisheries minister. Her caricatures used to be flashed across not only Indonesia, but across Southeast Asia, wearing a bulletproof vest with Kalashnikov here, a grenade launcher here, and so on. She was a no-nonsense person. And when the Chinese were hitting with their Coast Guard vessels, Indonesian Coast Guard and naval vessels, blatantly in the Natuna Islands EEZ, in the same period, 2015 or 16, she ordered all captured fishing vessels, whether from Vietnam, China, or any other country which were pooled together in Natuna Islands, to be bombed out of the water. And not a whimper from the Chinese. So they understand a taste of their own medicine. So my answer to the road ahead, first answer, is retaliate in such a manner that they can't do a thing, where the law is on your side. We don't have to get worried. Look at the size, insofar as military might, of Argentina is concerned. Look at Indonesia against China. And look at so many others, including the South Koreans. Now, a lot of people are saying, my God, China and Russia have become such thick friends. It seems to be something which is going to trouble the West, particularly United States, a rival of both, and the rest of the world. Because these two giants, if they get together. So the first time they got together was when China had violated the Philippines EEZ and was troubling the Filipinos and was threatening sanctions against China. And America had already imposed sanctions against Russia because of Crimea in 2014. What did the two leaders do? For a nondescript bilateral naval exercise which used to be staged amongst 5 ships total, 2-3 from each side, alternately in Vladivostok or in some port, and this time it was in Qingdao. Both of them decided quietly to land up there and give a speech. And they said, to maintain, restore peace and tranquility, or words to that effect, we too, the largest nations in the Pacific, have decided to hereafter do these exercises to make sure all those who cast an evil eye on the Pacific are forewarned. And since then, this handshake has continued, including that big deal of oil and gas from Russia. Now, China is hungry for gas and oil, much more than 2014. So they are lapping up deals after deals. China is wanting to get into the Arctic as if it was an Arctic nation. They need Russian support. The Russians are not realizing what they will do finally. China has recently renamed Vladivostok in the Chinese language starting with H and claiming it. That has troubled and brought frowns and frowns on Putin's forehead, but he can't do a thing. China has also said, one of its members of delegation which were visiting Moscow, that parts of eastern Siberia, which used to be historically ours, must get back to China. And they are eyeing the Baikal Lake for meeting shortages of fresh water, potable water, which is terrible in the north and west of China. So this is making Lord Palmerston, the great British statesman of the 19th century, turn in his grave once again. Because he's saying there are no permanent friends or enemies. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely true about Russia and China. So someday Putin is going to wake up if he gets his claws out of Ukraine and realize that the Chinese have already done enough damage. And if he has to stop it, he better do it earlier. So let me now briefly talk about, I had put the timer at 18 minutes, even though the chair had said up to 15 to 20 minutes, but let me shut this off, lest I get a warning. Hainan to Djibouti. Hainan is the southernmost naval base of China. To Djibouti, the first military overseas base is 5,000 plus nautical miles. Not easy. These are not Chinese waters. Whether Sri Lanka can be used for operational or peaceful turnaround, whether Gwadar can be used, whether some other East African port can be used. If there is a situation of conflict, you know none of these countries will be comfortable and will have to tell China, sorry. In any case, by the way, Colonel Herath would recall, the Jayavardhane Rajiv Gandhi Accord of July 1987 had a line exchanged in the evening of the same day, with both agreeing that Trincomalee or any other Sri Lankan port will not be used by any third country's military vessels or aircraft, which may be prejudicial to Indian security interests. And it is for that reason that many a times you have been absolutely straightforward. I don't mind what you said about the eavesdropping ship that goes Yuan 5. The Soviets kept doing it throughout the Cold War against America. An UNCLOS allows you to allow research vessels, but these are more than research vessels, and a good thing that you have told the Chinese that they cannot visit Hambantota and Colombo at will. When they come into Indian waters, we not only take note, we know how to counteract, and therefore there is no problem. Insofar as the Indian peninsula is concerned, ladies and gentlemen, we have to remember it is the second largest peninsula in the world, owned by one country, at 2.2 million square kilometers. That's why we pride ourselves for having had almost 200 ports around its periphery, out of which only 60 may be operational, only 40 may be getting used for overseas trade. But that is our lifeblood, because our economy depends on foreign trade. 40% of our GDP is contributed by imports and exports by the sea. There is no alternative for certain volumes and weights in any case. And therefore, to protect the Indian peninsula, we need those numbers which were determined by the emergency committee of the cabinet and have not been met yet. We need numbers. We need technology as well. We need numbers more because of these threats, the threats to our west, and particularly because the Indian Ocean out of the Indo-Pacific is the worst crucible of all kinds of transnational crime, from piracy to terrorism to drugs to gun running and the hash highway along the Makran coast. So we need numbers to continuously patrol these areas and also to safeguard our sovereignty. So what should really be the road ahead? If the Chinese went to the Maldives, I still feel it is once again transitional. It's transitional at the political level in that country, and obviously things will change. Of course, when Abdullah Yameen was the president there. You'll recall somewhere in 2017 or 16, they made the biggest mistake, which they must start realizing, of having issued an offer of 11 islands in the Maldives on lease. And the first people to come were the Chinese private company to say, we will set up a tourist resort. Only 5 minutes by boat from Malé International Airport. It was under the Education Ministry and the police forces who used to use it for picnics and so on and so forth. It's gone. It's gone for 50 years to a Chinese company, obviously it's Chinese government, in the name of tourism for $4 million, less than peanuts, not peanuts, chilka of peanuts. It cannot come back. But thankfully, when Indians told even the Abdullah Yameen government, which was not too friendly, that, you know, you are selling away your sovereignty. And then they pulled back because some sheikhs from the Gulf, particularly from Saudi Arabia, were willing to buy some of those islands for their private use. What should we be doing? I think we are doing very well insofar as dependence on Chinese imports having been curtailed after Kalwan. And if Huawei has been kept out, I think more and more people must be kept out. Sarojini Nagar market should be told not to vie for those cheap cordless phones and mobile phones. Whatever manufacturing units have been set up here, slowly they should become totally ours. Insofar as geostrategies are concerned, Quad Plus, instead of just Quad, should include countries like Vietnam, like Indonesia, and anybody else who's in trouble. I think there are certain components of ASEAN which have doles, and in free infrastructure, as they thought, there are no free lunches in those countries from China. But the rest of the ASEAN and many others in Southeast Asia are very, very troubled. And these should be wooed by us. We don't have to do FONOPs in the Pacific, not just because we can't afford so far away, but because we are not a resident Pacific power. You do it, somebody else will do it. And insofar as the Chinese are concerned, we need not fear. As I said, the closest port naval base of the Chinese is 5,000 miles away from Djibouti. They cannot sustain. They do not yet have a truly blue water force. Otherwise, by now, Liaoning and Shandong, which is still staggering on 1 foot, would have made some forays. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral Arup Singh. The last speaker is Ambassador Bambawale, a career diplomat, and he just chaired the earlier session. You know, Prime Minister Vajpayee had said, "Sarkarein aayegi, sarkarein jayengi, partiyan aayegi, partiyan tootegi, but desh rehna chahiye." So the diplomacy has seen right from the word go, Indo-China relations. Gautam, may I request you to pan out as to how diplomacy has taken this ups and downs of the various governments that have happened, but still ensured that we are on the right track. And especially you have seen both the good times of Wuhan when you were there physically, when Prime Minister met Xi Jinping, and then thereafter, of course. So may I request you to take the podium.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to speak at this superb seminar. So let me start by saying that I think it's a great honor to be speaking last in the last session, because I also have the last word. So I'm delighted to be speaking last. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give you a macro perspective of India-China relations and focus on the road ahead. So if you look back, it was in December 1988 when the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, visited China. that the template for the India-China relationship was laid during his interactions with the Chinese leadership, particularly with the then Supreme Leader of China, Deng Xiaoping. Jaidev Ranade and I both happened to be stationed in Beijing at our embassy there, so we remember those days very clearly. But that was the template in which India-China relations developed right from December 1988 to, I would say, roughly the start of 2020. And what was that template? The template was as follows, that while India and China had differences and had not resolved their boundary issue, they would maintain peace and tranquility on the border while attempting to resolve the boundary, while trying to resolve the issues on the boundary between them. This was all on the one hand regarding the boundary. On the other hand, the rest of the relationship, whether in the area of commerce, trade, investment, culture, science, technology, was allowed to move ahead. So this was the template in which India-China relations developed from December 1988 till the start of 2020. Now, as we moved forward in the 21st century, we realized that India had changed, China had changed, and the rest of the world had also changed. And as a result of that, there were certain frictions which developed and which happened between India and China. On the military side, there were frictions like at Depsang in 2013, at Chumar in 2014, in Bhutan in 2017. But there were also frictions between the two countries, positions that the two countries took which were diametrically opposite in other areas, whether it was at the World Trade Organization, whether it was in the area of the United Nations, etc. And therefore, the leadership of both countries realized that there was a need to have a new template in which the India-China relationship could move ahead. And this was the effort, to find a new template for the India-China relationship, which was the motivating factor for having the two informal summits between the leaders of India and China, between Prime Minister Modi on the one hand and President Xi Jinping on the other. The first of those informal summits took place at Wuhan in April 2018, and the second one took place here in India, in Chennai, in October 2019. The focus of the efforts in those meetings was to try to see if we could find a new normal, a new template, a new methodology, a new way forward in India-China relations. Unfortunately, and I have written about this in public, so I don't hesitate in saying so, and of course, as General Kalita will realize, there is independence once you have retired from government service. You can say what the hell you want, which you couldn't while you were in service. But I believe that when Xi Jinping arrived in Chennai in October of 2019, he had already ordered his military to begin preparations for what eventually developed as their operation in eastern Ladakh. So why he did so, it's not something which I have really thought about. We'll have to find out, we'll have to analyze it more closely. But by 2019 end, he had already decided that there would be a kind of military operation which then later unfolded and which we saw happening in eastern Ladakh in the summer of 2020. Now, once the Chinese had undertaken this military operations in eastern Ladakh, the whole relationship has got into disequilibrium. The whole relationship has got disturbed. And as a result of it, of course, our military authorities and our militaries, both the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, responded magnificently. We held the Chinese at a certain point on the line of actual control. Very many people ask the question, have we lost land? Have we lost territory? And the answer to that is very complex, because when you don't have a boundary, when you don't have a line of control or a line of actual control which is common between the two sides, it's very difficult to answer this question. But the fact is that we know even from public records, from what has appeared in the newspapers and magazines, and I'm not, revealing some great state secrets, but we realized that there were certain points on the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh which the Indian Army used to patrol to in the past, which it is not able to do today. So obviously I can say that the status quo has changed, and we have attempted to disengage troops at several points in eastern Ladakh, but there are still two outstanding areas where this has not happened and which we hope that we will be able to do. Now, where does that take us? The government of India has responded adequately and correctly by banning Huawei from our 5G and future 6G and 7G rollouts and trials. We have blocked certain Chinese companies from investing in India. We have not really focused entirely on imports and exports, but we know that we are taking measures which will reduce Chinese imports into India because we will start manufacturing things which we are importing today ourselves. So I think on the whole, the response of the government of India has been adequate. We have shown that the relationship has been put into disequilibrium. How do we move ahead? My answer to that, and I think the government of India is holding to that line, is by quoting to you a Chinese saying which states that the one who ties the knot has to untie it. And in this case, the knot has been tied by the Chinese side, by the Chinese military, by the Chinese government. And they have the primary responsibility to untie it. Till then, India will continue to have the kind of policies that we have. We need to persevere with the current policy. We need to be tough with China. As General Kalita said, and I agree with him entirely, that they do not understand anything else but firmness. We need to be firm about this. If we deter and go back, they will take it as a sign of weakness. So the road ahead is going to be tough. The road ahead is going to be rocky. The road ahead is going to see India-China relations slip to new lows, but this is what India will have to do if we have to stand up to the China challenge. One last point which I would like to mention with both Dr. Ajit Ranade and Dr. Vijay Kelkar here, because we wrote a book on this. India needs to focus on its domestic economy. We need to grow our economy in the coming 10, 15, 20 years at 7, 8, maybe even 9 or 10% if we can. We need to focus our energies on manufacturing more in India. We need to focus our energies on replacing Chinese imports. And that is the direction in which we need to, all of us, not just the government of India, but the people of India also need to move. And that is the road ahead which will stand us in good stead. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you to the organizers.
Thank you, Gautam. We have overshot the time, and especially Anup Singh has to catch a flight. However, I'll just quickly take a round of questions. A total of 5 questions I will take, and that would be the end. Starting with the front, Mr. Soni, please. Then Mahajan, then the person who's, okay, Soman, and then the red shirt, and the 2 ladies that side. Okay. So, but we're going to just have one round, and may I request all of you to please write down the questions if there are any. Has Anup left? His laptop is here. Okay.
Thank you, M.R. Gokhale. I wish to express, first of all, high appreciation of the presentations made by all the panelists. They were very insightful, very balanced. Now, as rightly mentioned by Mr. Bambawale, he took a macro perspective and looked into the future also, a macro perspective of the past and a look at the perspective of the future. I would do the same. Perhaps we may, in all fairness, take a view that from December 1988 till 2019, what transpired suited the People's Republic of China rather well, in the sense that they could develop their policies vis-à-vis India, so to such an extent that today, one of the defining features of the last 25 years has been not just the ascent of China, but the ascent of China in nexus with Pakistan. And today we face that immediate existential threat. Now coming to a very micro approach, today is the 19th of March. The election process starts on the 19th of April. It stretches to the 4th of June, when the results are to be announced. Everyone who's associated with the constitutional process involving elections and the process following elections would appreciate the fact the entire state, the Union of India, is engaged heavily in managing the general elections to Parliament, especially in our multi-party democracy. So why should we assume that a menacing existential nexus, which has built up tremendous potential for hybrid warfare, including cyber warfare, which can have very deleterious consequences, should withhold itself from interfering at a time when we are going to be extremely occupied with our own internal processes. We know about the purges that have taken place in the military forces of the People's Republic of China. We know that in Pakistan elections have just completed, and we know what the outcome of that is. We know that they have been constantly upgrading the methods and the timings of operations against us. So why should we not think that they will now be up to mischief exactly when it be most inconvenient to us? In fact, perhaps a message that could go out from this conference could be that this is the time that India should be most prepared. The people of India, the government, the state, all parts of all organs of the state and the people, whether at the union or the central or the state level, right up to the village level, should gear up to the fact that we are entering a phase of extreme vulnerability in which we have to unite and do everything we can to carry out this process, mindful of the looming threat. I would like to have comments on this from the panel. Thank you very much.
I'm Brigadier Mahajan, and my question is to General Kalita. I start with the premise that our offensive and defensive capability to take on China has improved drastically because of our improved infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure has improved so much. General Rajiv Chaudhary is sitting here, and he also gave a presentation. It has increased drastically. That is one issue. So I would like to tell us about this improved capability of taking both defensive as well as offensive measures. And with the Arunachal Pradesh Express Highway coming up, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years or 4 years, ability to transfer troops from one valley into another, Siang to Siom to Subansiri to Husarli, Huri, Tawang, will improve drastically. And to add to that, just about 2 months back, we raised the 18 Corps. Central sector was one of the weakest because just one brigade or a division used to take care of it. And under a central command, which was not an operational command, I mean, I shouldn't be saying so, but it was it was more of an administrative command. Now with the 18 Corps taking over, do you think it will improve the capability of both offense and defense in the central sector also? So management against China in Ladakh, in the central sector, and also in the eastern sector has improved drastically, both offensively and defensively. Your comments on that?
So my question was to Admiral Anup, sir. He's not there. Sir, right at the outset, I would like to thank, compliment Admiral Anup on an excellent talk. I'm just going to differ with you on one particular point that you mentioned, and you talked, of course, the point that you made would be very reassuring to the Americans with their 11 aircraft carriers, where you seem to suggest that, that should not really worry them in terms of the numbers of hulls that the Chinese are building, sir. I could talk about it from the point of vulnerability, I could talk from the point of threat, but I'm going to restrict myself from the point of threat. Because vulnerability is known, a carrier of the Nimitz class just costs about $4.5 billion, and another 6,000 sailors are going to be on top of it. I'm talking from the threat point of view, and I'll give you historical kind of arguments. You look at the Falkland Wars, there were a total of 3 aircraft carriers. The Britishers had 2, HMS Invincible and HMS Hermes. On the other side, the Argentinians had 1. As soon as there were 2 losses of surface crafts, that is General Belgrano from the Argentinian side, and you had Sheffield, which was from the British side, both the carriers were pulled to a safe distance. That is number one. Even if you go into the 1971 operations, the Vikrant was only committed after the threat of the submarines was over, when the Ghazi was sunk. You look at it from the American point of view, their aim or their idea of addressing the Chinese aggression initially was force projection so that they ensure that the Chinese influence is not coming beyond the first island chain. However, with their anti-access, anti-denial strategies, that made them rethink about their strategy. And in fact, now there is a kind of an inversion of strategy that is being talked about. Because what the Americans are probably now trying to do is a replication of the denial strategy with American characteristics. That is also.
Since this is the only round, 3 more questions and that's it. Yeah, the person in red hand. Where? Yeah, so
Hello,
right,
sir.
and after that, they're at the end there, and the lady in the between.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is to Bambawale, sir. Sir, given all the situations lately, what are the areas where India and China are cooperating for securing mutual interest at global level?
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. I'm a first-year master's student from Symbiosis School of International Studies. My question is to Lieutenant General Kalita, sorry. To what extent does China have influence over the ethnic armed groups operating along the Indo-Myanmar border? Is there evidence of China supporting these groups in any ways that could destabilize the region, especially for India? I have a follow-up question. We see videos and reports of Chinese soldiers finding it difficult to cope with the high altitude deployments like we saw in Galwan. Is there any measures they are taking to improve their high altitude warfare capabilities? Thank you, sir.
Hello. Sir, good evening, sir. Sir, I myself, Biyuf, I am from Manipur. I am a student of Defense and Strategic Study in the first year. My question is, sir, to Lieutenant General, he is Eastern Command of Northeast. Sir, as you know, Northeast has a lot of insurgency. So India government has kept Armed Forces Special Power Act in the Northeast like Kashmir. So my question is, how has the insurgency affected the overall security situation in the Northeast and the neighboring region? And the second question is, how does India government balance its strategic interest in the Northeast with its interest with China?
sir. My name is Anuprita Kher. I am from DIMA, Defense Equipments Manufacturers Association, and my question is to Kalita, sir. Sir, regarding modernization and deterrent weaponry, does recent firing of Agni 5 MIRV capable missile has any large significance?
Thank you for all the questions. Since Admiral Arup Singh has to catch a flight, may I request you to please go ahead for...
First of all, I must clarify that it was not indiscipline on my part to move out and come back. I was requested to go and have a quick lunch because my flight is at 1600 hours. So I was allowed to even go without answering any questions, but then Namrata was giving me dirty looks. There are no free lunches, so I had to come back. Thank you for that question, Marshal Soman. Insofar as the Falklands War is concerned, there are certain things that have remained below the radar insofar as facts about ammunition given by a NATO country to Argentina are concerned, particularly torpedoes for its submarines. So perhaps separately we could talk about it. And you know that UK was one of the most important components of NATO. Insofar as the hitting the Belgrano was concerned, there's something that you must have heard about, a total exclusion zone. It's not written in the law of armed conflict. It is not permitted, or it has not been codified, but this was TEZ for the first time in history declared by the British, and its perimeter was approximately 500 nautical miles by, if you called it a diameter. So the Argentinians didn't expect that they could be hit over there. However, the Belgrano was a very old cruiser. It did not have any anti-submarine warfare capabilities. So that's insofar as the Falklands War are concerned. I didn't fully understand the AAAD with American characteristics, but if you meant that the Chinese did not interfere in the 71 war, is that what you meant? No. What was it? What was it regarding?
That has been put into effect by the Chinese, there is a certain amount of threat to the American carriers who are now only operating on the fringes of the South China Sea and on the East China Sea. I was particularly referring to the kind of threat that is posed to the aircraft carriers, because even in the American maritime strategy, the aircraft carriers are supposed to be the centerpiece. But now they're having a rethink, and that is what I was trying to tell, is that the Americans want to throw the same strategy back at the Chinese. It's a kind of inversion that is taking place, is they want to ensure that the Chinese don't come beyond the first island chain through anti-access, anti-denial, rather than entirely depending upon aircraft carriers.
Okay, a very valid question. And if I mentioned in my talk about Vladivostok being the cynosure of two eyes at the moment, there is a reason for that. They want to make sure that they go beyond the first island chain and staging post in Vladivostok. I don't think it'll ever happen in the future because the Russians are not going to be sleeping. Insofar as this business of AAAD is concerned, there is no doubt that the DF-21, which is being dubbed as the carrier killer, has put everyone on the back foot, and the US Navy in particular is worried, because after all, a carrier can be hit like that. But their carriers are not vintage as yet, not even the Nimitz class. There is the Gerald Ford, of course, is the latest, and all future carriers will be based on the Gerald Ford or beyond. They have sufficient amount of anti-missile defense, not just anti-air defense, with the escorts that surround the carrier, apart from the carrier's own aircraft, whose and a US carrier carries between 85 to 90 aircraft of all kinds, an umbrella of about 200 nautical miles. However, this being a ballistic missile, there is no doubt they are worried. The Chinese are also fully aware that if they try anything of the sort, even with a conventional warhead, the Americans will not keep quiet. They'll be made mincemeat of in their own heartland, because retaliation will positively happen. And there is no dearth of ammunition. By the way, why the Americans are in the state that they are, because in Barack Obama's time, there was a sudden decline of budgetary allocation. And after the 9/11 attacks, I think sometime around 2009, they peaked at $900 billion budget. It came down to about $500+ billion, which was nothing even to sustain. That's why their navy has been declining in numbers. Now they are on an upswing. So things will positively happen. There is no doubt it will be a cat and mouse game insofar as AAD is concerned. They'll keep the carriers a little further away. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Admiral Arup Singh. And Anup, we wish you a safe flight back home. Thank you. May I hand over the mic now to General Kalita for answers.
Thank you. I didn't know that I'll get so many questions. So, but still I'll try and answer them in a very, very brief manner. But otherwise, 7 questions will take up about 15 minutes. Firstly was about the collusive threat which Mr. Soni had asked about. The possibility of collusive threat from China and Pakistan in multi-domain warfare is always been talked about. And I think there is adequate preparations in place, whether it is in the time of elections or in any other time during the campaigning season. Though there are certain challenges as far as capability development is concerned, towards meeting both the threats at the same time. But the preparations are on duties, so there is no dilution as far as arm play out more during the election campaign time. The second question is General Brigadier Mahajan had asked about the offensive and defensive capability. Basically, what I would say is that the 3 aspects towards capability development when you look at building up offensive or defensive capability of any armed forces. One is the force restructuring or modernization, and the second is infrastructure development, which can support such type of offensive or defensive operations. And third is, which has become very, very relevant now, is infusion of technology, because we have to keep pace with the development in technological fields that is taking place around us, and we need to migrate from a force-centric sort of military to technology-dependent military as well, though the boots on ground will always count. So as far as offensive and defensive capability build-up is concerned, I think the rebalancing that has taken place in last 3-4 years has given us adequate teeth to launch any form of offensive across the non-borders as well. The recent conversion of the 18th Corps, which you talked about as part of Central Command, has basically given unity of command in the central sector, which was lying neglected. And it has both inherent defensive as well as offensive capability with the troops that have been organized or organized in Central Command. So that is as far as offensive and defensive capability is concerned. Next we come to the Myanmar. Somebody had asked about the ethnic armed groups and the Chinese support. There are 2 aspects to it as relevant to India. One is the ethnic armed groups which are operating for some sort of autonomy or sovereignty from Myanmar government. That is particularly in these areas of Shan state, Kachin, Rakhine and Chin states. So those are the areas where we all are aware that China has been playing the dual game of supporting the military junta as well as the ethnic armed groups traditionally. Right from beginning they have been supporting both sides. In fact, if you all remember last year when the
Three Brotherhood Alliance launched an attack, that October attack in the Shan state particularly, and occupied most of the areas close to the Myanmar-China border. So that time China had involved both the parties, the military as well as the ethnic armed groups, to come onto some sort of an understanding, some sort of course, which did not last long. The conflict are still ongoing. So short answer is yes, China definitely has been supporting the ethnic armed groups. There is also another aspect to it as far as Myanmar is concerned about the insurgent groups, with the Indian insurgent groups which has established camps in Myanmar and operating from Myanmar. I'm talking of NSCNIM or the valley-based insurgent groups which are based at Manipur, from Manipur, as also the Alpha Independent from Assam. So all these groups have got their camps in Myanmar, and it is known that the valley-based insurgent groups have been fighting alongside the Myanmar army against the PDF, that's the pro-democratic forces. So that's another aspect. Whether the Chinese are supporting them now or not, that we can debate. It's a debatable thing, but earlier times, if you know, 70s when the Naga insurgency started, it all started from funding and giving of weapons and ammunition by the Chinese. But presently, what level of support is being given, that is something we have to see. The Chinese preparation for the high altitude warfare, I think it has improved drastically after the lessons they have learned both in Doklam as well as in Galwan. We have seen a lot of infrastructure development which assists them in carrying out warfare in the high altitude, long-term sustainability in high altitude areas in terms of those oxygen chambers which are there, as also their permanent presence. Earlier what used to happen is they used to come, the PLA used to come, only the border guarding forces used to remain along the border. The PLA used to come for training for 3 months, 6 months during the campaigning season to the Tibetan plateau. But now we see a forward deployment. So the permanent presence and certain technological assistance has definitely helped them. And they have also been regularly carrying out training. Last couple of years, we have even observed them being stationed in areas close to the LAC, even during the winter months. And they have also carried out training during the winter months. So I think there has been a lot of development as far as their capability to launch an high altitude warfare is concerned. Next is impact of insurgency in Northeast on the security. I think over last 10, 12 years, the security situation in Northeast has stabilized to a large extent, except for the Manipur violence, which started off on 3rd of May. Otherwise, the entire Northeast was progressing well towards peace and development. If we take state-wise, Assam, except for certain districts, 4 districts to be specific in Upper Assam, rest of the areas, there is no semblance of any insurgent movement. The only presence is of about 200, 250 Alpha insurgents who are located in camps across the Indo-Myanmar border, established across the border in Myanmar. Even the valley-based insurgent groups, that's the Meitei insurgent groups, which were earlier located in Myanmar camps, post they are siding with the Myanmar army in fight against PDF. They have been targeted by the PDF as well as the Chin Defense Forces, and they have at times been coming and seeking shelter back in Manipur. Recently, you would all know that UNLF Pambay, one of these group of UNLF, that's one of the Meitei insurgent groups, have signed a ceasefire agreement along with the Manipur state government and the central government. So overall security situation has improved quite a lot. The only challenge remains is of resolution of the Kuki-Meitei conflict that has been taking place in Manipur, and there is no definite road or something, some way that has been laid out, or roadmap that has been laid out for the near future. I think Agni 5 and the MIRB capability, I think that definitely is a good technology demonstrator as far as our capacity building is concerned, and it's going to going to assist us in improving our deterrence against the Chinese threat. I think I'll end here. If I have left out anything, I can take on later.
With two of us from the Air Force, there's no question on air bars, so it's very reassuring. But over to Ambassador.
There was one question about whether India and China are cooperating on global issues, and the answer to that is no. Well, just to elaborate, place between the government of India and the government of China continue to attend some of the multilateral, plurilateral groupings that they're part of, whether it is SCO, whether it is BRICS, whether it is the G20. But there's really no real cooperation on global issues in those, at those meetings. It has to be done beforehand bilaterally, and those meetings are just not taking place. There is no other interaction except for these 3 or 4 between the two governments, and therefore it cannot be discussed.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause for the... And now, with the permission of Dr. Khare and Ranade, we are not taking a break. So we are going to start with the concluding. So may I request Dr. Ranade to take, and thereafter Dr. Khare.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our seminar, a 2-day seminar. And firstly, I would like to thank all of you for being present, for asking what I think were very incisive and pertinent questions, and to Dr. Khare and Air Marshal Gokhale for helping us organize this conference. I'd just like to make a couple of observations based on what I heard and the questions that were asked over the days. One point I would like to make, and since the subject did come up and General Kalita did answer it, in fact I was hoping that someone would raise the issue of the Northeast, because you could not have had a better person to respond. But while on this topic, we also discussed yesterday cyber and cyber warfare. And in that context, I just want to mention that the manner in which the cyber warriors manipulate videos and texts is also something which is, if I may say, a force multiplier in causing dissension. And if you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a video that went viral showing a certain community being discriminated against, being beaten up, etc. And they were portrayed as people from the Northeast. If you remember, a lot of them began leaving. When a forensic study was carried out trying to determine the source of that, it was found that actually it was a Pakistani-made video regarding the Rohingyas in Bangladesh. So I just thought I'd mention that there is a lot of that going on, and there is a lot of disinformation also that is floating around. The second thing is the couple of questions that were asked, asking essentially whether we can cooperate with the Chinese, whether, whether the Chinese is so strong that we can't compromise. I think we need to get out of a defensive mindset. We've heard from the experts here today that we are in a strong position. We are in a position where we can respond meaningfully in case the Chinese attempt any adventurism. And I think as far as cooperation is concerned, when you can't trust a person, how can you cooperate with him? That will be my question. But anyway, our purpose was to come here to raise an awareness about China, its activities, and how we need to deal with it. And I think going by the questions raised and the interest taken, I think we have achieved some of that at least. So I thank you all for being here with us over the last 2 days and for making this conference a success. Thank you.
Respected Ranadiji and Bhushan Gokhleji and all eminent scholar, my dear student. In fact, when we started first strategic dialogue on rise of China and implication on the world, for the world, I said, why should not we have a dialogue on fall of the China and its implication of the world? And that was my, in fact, the dream that how we could think about that, which are the indicators are important to understand the new generation, how China is going to fall, and what would be implication for the world. But most of the strategic thinking based in Delhi-centric and the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies along with the CAS and along with the Jayadrij Nanade, we thought that we could have it discussion in a southern part of India, and Pune is the place where it is strategic hub, strategic place in all contexts, and Department of Defense and Strategic Studies and Savitribai Phule Pune University, we call it as Oxford of the East. So whatever you come out with the policy matter, that reflects not only in national policy, but it's global policy. So from last 2 years, and this is third year, we are going to completing a third strategic dialogue on rise of China and implication for the world. Let me share a few things which could not get a time to what I'm thinking about what would be a future coming up, particularly while understanding the Chinese strategic development. Now, from last 200 years, we are talking about three important theories, particularly Atiman theory talks about sea power, who controls sea, control the world. Then Mackinder's heartland theory talks about who controls land, control the world, and Duet talks about who control the space, control the world. But now, last 1 decade, there is new theories coming, Indian power theory. And this Indian power theory talks about Vasudha Kutumbakam, where the slogan is that, and we have showcased our capability through G20, and we are just dealing with the global peace and harmony through Vasudha Kutumbakam philosophy. But hinge is that as long as we emerge, now we are talking about the $5 trillion economy, where Chinese is having around 18 to 19 trillion dollar economy. But what is the difference between China and India to emerge the fast economy, that is the homogeneous population, whereas the 90% in Chinese population are homogeneous, and other part of side our population is number of diversity, and there are the difficulties, challenges, as well as there are the opportunities. So in that condition, what we need to equilibrium distribution of resources, equilibrium distribution of all kind of development, where from Delhi to Andaman Nicobar or any other part of India, we need to distribution of our resources, distribution of our capability. And last point, which is very important, the kind of Chinese using education as a soft diplomacy, we need to develop that kind of mechanism to use education as a soft diplomacy. Then we can change the mindset of perception to understand the rise of China and its implication on the world. I'm very happy that a very eminent scholar has come and delivered the lectures here. I'm expecting those who delivered the lectures, please give us in a writing form so we can come up with the book form. In fact, it is very difficult. Our rapporteur are here, but compiling what we are saying and what they are compiling, most of the things is changing. So we are not, particularly myself, is not daring to publish in the book form. So I would request each one to send us your script so we can come out with the book form. My Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, staff of the International Center, and particularly Bharti Madam and her team is working hard. Please give a round of applause to her and her team to make this event success within a short span of time. In fact, in between, a lot of different things happened. So I was not sure whether we are going to have it, the strategic dialogue in the month of March, but within a short span of time, we did it, and special thanks goes to Jaydevji and Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhaleji. They extended all kind of support to make it this event success. All eminent scholars, I'm not taking any name, but my Honorable Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Dr. Umranikar, Air Marshal Soni, then Ambassador Bambawale sir, Vijayji Kelkar, Air Marshal Soman, and all my colleagues who supported to the department activity very well. And I'm looking forward to have it fourth indicators where we will focus on how China is going to fall and what would be implication for the world. With this word, I'm going to, once again, I thanks to each one, particularly my student from last 2 days, all electronic and print media, they have covered our dialogue. And now talks in Pune city itself. You talked in Delhi, but somehow it not percolated in other part. But if you talked in Pune, that percolated to everywhere. So next strategic dialogue would be in a different form, different topic, and I'm looking forward to again see you in a fourth strategic dialogue in next year. Thank you very much.
I think both my colleagues have spoken, so there is nothing much that I can add, except for what I had spoken at Taiwan when I was taken along by Mr. Jaydev Ranade, is that thank God the belligerent China didn't wait for 5 or 10 more years. Because I think the whole of West and US in particular, and including India, and all of us were kind of aware that they're building up, but not getting prepared ourselves, and the entire Europe, of course, we know, and all that is going on. So in case they had waited another 5-7 years, I don't know exactly how much of, defensive or otherwise operations that we could have been able to ensure. But I'm a great optimist always, and I like to mention, apart from thanking everybody, that looking at very reassuring picture of India emerging once again in terms of Atmanirbhar and the policy changes, I like to always quote that it's an optimist who designed an aircraft, a pessimist a parachute. Thank you, Jai Hind.
Thank you all of you all for being present here for this dialogue. May I request all of you to stand for the national anthem? This will be followed by lunch outside.
अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you and Jai Hind. Please join us for lunch.